Citizens Committee on the Public Hearing Process. If that sounds like double... And we are what we've been doing is meetings since June. The Anchorage Municipal Assembly, my name is Jane Anvik, and I'm the chair of this glorious team of volunteers. And we have been meeting since June to review some of the laws and some of the policies of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly. They set up the task force in June and asked us to review their policies and their procedures and their practices related to the conversation between the community and themselves when it comes to preparing laws, which are called ordinances or resolutions. And so we've been looking at that, and we've suggested some recommendations of things that might be done by the Assembly to improve the quality of the conversation between the public and their elected officials. We had a public hearing on September 3rd when we invited people to come and tell us what their experiences had been and to share with them their ideas about what they would suggest for how it could be improved. So today we are having a public hearing on what's called the draft recommendations. In the back of the Assembly Hall, you'll find the entryway, and there is an agenda, and there is a document called the Draft Recommendations dated September 20th, which is the Citizens Task Force on the Assembly Public Hearing Process. And what we're doing today is having a public hearing to see if you have any recommendations or any comments or any ideas that you would like to share about the draft recommendations that this group of people has prepared. So today, we're here to talk about the draft recommendations. You'll notice in that piece of paper out there that talks the draft recommendations that there are 9 broad topics that we looked at. We looked at what the charter requirements are for public hearings. We looked at the public notice process for when the community is informed about what is coming before the Assembly. We looked at what actually happens at the public hearings here in this room, how people are afforded an opportunity to speak, what happens when they come, what happens when there's a lot of people, what happens when there's a few people, and how that process has been working. On the 4th item, we talked about substitute versions of ordinances. That means that when an ordinance is prepared, there's a conversation. Both the public talks with the Assembly and the Assembly talks with each other, and sometimes they change the ideas of that proposed law before it becomes a law. And sometimes they change it so much that they actually substitute one version of that law for another. And the questions that we had on this topic had to do with how do people in the public always keep track of what substitute version we're on and what pieces started in the beginning and got retained in the past and how they got changed. So there's a whole section on what happens to substitute versions of ordinances. The 5th item is the continuation of a public hearing. Sometimes there are so many people who come to a public hearing that the Assembly has to set a continuation. At midnight, they have to close off their business, and sometimes there are more people who want to talk than can be accommodated at midnight. So they have to continue the public hearing to another time. So we talked about how that time is established and when it is or is not convenient for people to be able to participate. The 6th broad area is called the public record of an ordinance or a resolution. There are lots of ways for people to comment on the material before the Anchorage Assembly. They can send an email, they could come up here and testify, they could write a letter. And so what we were looking for is where is a place where everybody can see all the information that people receive. So how do we create the public record so that you, the public, have as much information as the Assembly does about different points of view that people have expressed? Finally, we talked about this room. This room, could people hear? Could they see? Were they feeling welcome? Were they feeling kind of intimidated? And have we created an environment in this room that makes it possible for people to be able to participate in the dialogue. So we talked about acoustics, we talked about if you're standing there, do you have to bob your head from one end to the other to see everybody, and how do we try to make sure it's as comfortable as possible? Item number 8 is community council collaboration. We have a governing instrument for Anchorage, which is called the Charter. The Charter is like our Constitution. And the Charter actually articulates that the community councils are created and they are established as a vehicle to improve neighborhood communication between the neighborhoods and the community and the assembly. So we spent a little bit of time about what would be important in strengthening the cooperation and the assessment of the community councils. And finally, the 9th topic is the assembly presence, where people on the assembly might come and go, and sometimes people don't know why they're coming and going, so it's always important to make sure that we have some clarity and some expectations about what we're doing. So this document was written by these people who are all volunteers, and what we do is we present it to you tonight and say, please tell us what you think about it or any opportunities that you have to be able to comment on it. At this point in our agenda, was supposed to be the call to order and then a roll call. But what I'd like to do, instead of actually just calling the roll and having people tell us their names, is I want to tell you about these terrific people who are your volunteers who've been serving on this task force. I'm going to start down here at this end, and that's Jim Barnett. And Jim Barnett served 2 terms on the Anchorage Municipal Assembly and had the opportunity to chair the assembly and had spent many years also working in private life as an attorney. Jim lives on the hillside and has been a very proactive member of our community and is currently working quite a bit with the Cook and Lit Historical Society, and he is a published author. So we are very pleased to have had the opportunity to work with Jim on this. Sitting next to Jim is Tim Potter. Tim Potter is a person who has lived in our community for over 30 years and has and serves as one of the owners in Dowell Engineering. It's not Dowell Engineering, it's Dowell HG. Tim Potter has worked on many land use issues in Alaska and in Anchorage, and he has been coming to public hearings on land use issues for 30 years. He started when he was 12. And he has seen the evolution of the public hearing process and the decision-making structure of this community up close and personal. And we are very, very pleased to have had his experience, his many years of experience in the conversation about public hearings. Thank you, Tim. Sitting next to Tim is Penny Goodstein. Penny is with the Alaska Interfaith Council of Anchorage. That is a council of churches that are come together for the purposes of saying are there community interests that all churches have in common. And it is an organization that doesn't take positions on issues, but it does provide a forum for people in the faith community to come together. And we have been very honored by Penny's very active participation in this discussion. She is with the Beth Shalom Synagogue. So we are delighted to have had that voice at our table. Sitting next to Penny is Joanne Hall. Joelle works with the AFL-CIO, which is a labor union organization in Anchorage, and she's been very involved in our community for the past 15 or 20 years, working on behalf of the interests of working men and women to make sure that their opportunities associated with their community and their work are respected and valued. Joelle was very active in the ordinance associated with the labor unions, which was called Ordinance Number 37, and her wisdom associated with that experience was very greatly appreciated on our deliberations. Sitting here is Bob Churchill. Bob is on the board of directors of the Federation of Community Councils. He has also been very involved in our community in a variety of ways and has probably sat on more public hearings in the Board of Game and the Board of Fish. So sometimes if you think there are issues of great concern in the Anchorage Assembly, you should go to a public hearing having to do with who gets to get the first or the last fish in Alaska. They are very contentious, and Bob's experience in that regard has been very helpful in thinking about how do we make sure that the conversation between the government and the people is fair and open, and that we have a common respect for both sides of an issue. So thank you, Bob. And he has been communicating with the Federation of Community Councils, and therefore in making sure that all the community councils are appraised of the information about our process here. Sitting on my right is Amanda Moser. Amanda is the Deputy Clerk for the Municipality of Anchorage and an active member of this task force. So she wears two hats where she's also running the machines, but she has been, and her experience in the last 3.5 years in the clerk's office has been invaluable to us as we have gone through our process, and we are very pleased that Amanda has just been certified as a formal clerk in the state of Alaska, and so we are really delighted to have been the opportunity to hear Amanda's perspective as a person who sits there every Tuesday night that the Assembly's been meeting for the last 3.5 years. Thank you, Amanda. Our most Our most treasured member of our committee is Arla Strazinski, who is to the other side of Amanda. Arla served on the Charter Commission, which helped create the Municipality of Anchorage. She served as an Alaska State Senator for over a decade, and she started her interest in local government and state government with the League of Women Voters, which is an organization designed to train people about public policy issues. Arla is wonderful, terrific, and this past week she celebrated her 86th birthday. So we are honored with her wisdom and her very good humor. Thanks, Arla. Sitting next to Arla is Carolyn Richards, Carolyn Ramsey, and Carolyn has been a recent graduate of Alaska Pacific University and has been very involved in our community in a variety of ways, working with community councils as well as on civil rights issues that have faced our community. And Carolyn has been a very strong and articulate spokesperson on behalf of making sure that we are inclusive in our conversations in the public. And finally, on the far end, we have Cheryl Richardson, who is with the Citizens Coalition, the Anchorage Citizens Coalition. And Cheryl has been making sure that people through the Citizens Coalition have always got access to their public officials and access to the information that they need for the communities to be able to make decisions. Cheryl has been living and working in our community for over 20 years on those issues, and so her breadth of experience has also been extremely beneficial for the conversation in this community, in this task force. I had served on the Charter Commission with Arla when I was 12, and had the privilege of learning about local government when we created the unified government of Anchorage in 1975 and 1976. I also had the privilege of serving on the Assembly for 2 terms and had the pleasure of chairing the Assembly when we were doing things like zoning the hillside for the very first time, or bringing Eagle River into the municipality of Anchorage against their will. So it was a very exciting time to be in local government in Anchorage. That's who we are, and I want to say it has been a privilege for the last several months to work with this terrific community of people. We are volunteers, and we are doing our work because we were asked to help the Assembly. I note over here on this corner we have a member of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly, Dick Trainey. Dick is sitting in and listening today, and he has been listening to our conversations on many occasions. Our job is to make recommendations for consideration by the Assembly, and Dick serves on what's called the Rules Committee of the Assembly. So our first report goes to the Rules Committee as a result of our conversations in hearing from you and hearing with each other. With that, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I think local government is working better than federal government today.
Well, we're working.
Yes, we are. Absolutely. Yes. We have to turn your mic on.
There, the green light's on. I just thought I'd point out that our last meeting will be a presentation in the Assembly chambers on 10/8. So we're very close to completing the work that we've been asked to do. Correct?
Correct. We will make our report to the Assembly next Tuesday night, October 8th, and we will make our report and our conversation with the Rules Committee on October 3rd, which is Thursday of this week at noon. So we will be handing off the ball to the Assembly on October 8th, based on what you tell us tonight. So with that, I'm going to open the public hearing and invite anyone who would like to come and talk to us about the draft recommendations that we have prepared to please come forward and tell us your name so we have ability to keep our record. I want to make sure you know that we are recording. We are recording it, so, and you are also a television star because we are recording this. We are on television and we are also recording it. And we don't have a time limit tonight. We have an opportunity for you to tell us what you think. Please share your name with us as you come forward.
Thank you very much. My name is Jim Ferguson. I am a Planning and Zoning Commissioner, but tonight I am here only representing myself and not the Planning and Zoning Commission. My first point is that the Assembly is not the only board that holds public hearings. There are a number of other boards and commissions, including the Planning and Zoning Commission, that frequently hold public hearings. With deference to Arlis, it would appear that a portion of the charter that deals with public hearing dates from at least 1978. The population in Anchorage in 1980 was approximately 180,000. Citizens could communicate with their elected and appointed representatives by landlines, snail mail, or by buttonholing them on the street. Our population for 2013 is estimated at 350,000. Approximately double that in 1978. Citizens can communicate via landlines, cell phones, email, Twitter, Facebook, web pages, etc., and buttonholing them on the street. The communication possibilities have more than doubled. We should not allow the public hearing process to be used as a political tool. That is clearly not what the Charter intended. In fact, the Charter clearly intended in Title II, Chapter 2.4, that community councils be the mechanism for public input to the boards and commissions, including the Assembly. I'm going to quote shortly from the Charter, Chapter 2.4. The purpose of this chapter is to provide a direct and continuing means of citizen participation in government and local affairs. Community councils are intended to give the people a method by which they can work together for expression and discussion of their opinions, needs, and desires in a manner that will have an impact on their community's development and services. Community councils are intended to give governmental agencies a method for receiving opinions, needs, desires, and recommendations of residents and groups. Community councils are intended to give local governing bodies an improved basis for decision-making assignment of priorities for all programs affecting community development and individual well-being. I think it's clear that the Charter intended that the community councils provide the input. Based on the above, it is clear that public hearings are being misused. Public hearings should be of a limited duration, should allow comments from both sides, and should give preference to bona fide, documented representatives of groups. In most cases, it is my opinion that public hearings should be limited to 1 hour. I've sat in those chairs till midnight on the public hearings that never end. I point out we start out with 180,000 people. We've blown through 350,000 people. The number of assembly members hasn't increased. The number of planning and zoning meetings haven't increased. Just, we keep on more and more people. Finally, if we do not make a change now, what will we be doing later when our population hits 750,000 people? The purpose of a public hearing was to provide input, not to be used as a political tool or whip. So I ask you to consider that as you make your recommendation to the Assembly. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Bob?
Yeah, through the chair. Jim, thank you so much for coming down tonight. Question I have is there's a number of areas who don't have active community councils, or their community council may not fully represent them and their ideas. How would you advise us on that dimension?
I think we're allowing the weakness to continue. I think if we were to go back to a community council, force them to, if they're not going to meet, expand their territory, have another community council take over it, and go forward. We require the land use and planning is what I hear mostly of. We require the developers to go and meet with the community councils and explain it to the community councils. And so let's use that tool. And being a little bit of a Philadelphia attorney, pardon me to the attorney's presence, the Bill of Rights that was in the back here that says the right to be heard at public hearings does not read the right to be heard at public hearings in front of the Assembly and in front of the public, in front of the planning and zoning. I think you could say a community council meeting was in fact a public meeting, and so that right could be exercised at that point. They should not be allowed to be a tool, a political tool. We all have too much to get done. Time that should be used by the Assembly people or the planning and zoning people to understand and really figure out what's going on or get consumed by public hearings that go on and on.
Thank you. Any other questions? Carolyn?
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming down. I have a question for you. How would you address when the municipality puts forth an ordinance that hasn't really been talked to the community about it, and the community comes out such as 37, such as 64 a number of years ago, and they're very angry because they have not really been consulted, talked about with it. And with 37, we had, what, 2 different S versions that came through, so there's actually 3 or 4 versions of that, because through public testimony, the Assembly was continuing to learn all of the different departments and what they actually did. Like, you really can't contract out the people who hold on to all the evidence, because that's really not something you want contracted out. So it's actually a fact-finding hearing. So how would you address that if you're going to cut down the public testimony, please? Thank you.
Good question, a valid question. The only thing I could recommend is possibly have a time period for written comments in the case of the S versions, which I totally understand what your comment is there. In fairness to the Assembly folks and in fairness to planning and zoning, we get our packets a week before the meeting. We get 6 or 8 inches of material, and we may not get through that material because we're volunteers just like you are. We may not get through that material until very shortly before the meeting. So the only thing I could come up with, and it's a suggestion and it may not pass the test, is after the last S version comes out, have a period of time for written comments so that the public does have the right to comment on what is proposed. And I recognize that's not a perfect answer, but the current public hearing process is not perfect either.
So if you have public written comments, I'm sorry, Arla.
No.
If you have public written comments, which is fine, part of the public testimony is sharing with everybody in the room, not just the Assembly. So right now, currently, when you submit a public comment to the municipal clerk or to your representative, nobody else sees it. So nobody else is actually educated currently within the public in that way.
I could see issues with that, but I would say maybe we would have to provide, if you were going to rely on a comment, a public comment, that would have to be somehow in the record for that. And it's not a perfect process, and if it were simple, we wouldn't have you 11 people trying to solve it. It would have been solved long before.
Mr. Ferguson, we have two more people that would like to pose questions. We have Mr. Potter and Arla Strazinski. Mr. Potter?
Jim, thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to pose a question back to you because of your involvement with the Planning and Zoning Commission. When a property owner comes forward with a rezone, it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission first for a public hearing, and then it is brought forward as an ordinance, a law, to the Assembly. Could you kind of outline, given your comments, how you would see that public hearing happening in front of the Assembly? What would occur?
If I could see two situations developing. If and I can see a definition problem immediately also, but if the application was approved basically as submitted, there has already been one public hearing, and I would not see a need for a second public hearing at the Assembly level. I mean, part of what you guys are doing here is taking public testimony to take some of the load off of the Assembly. Part of what Planning and Zoning does every month is to take pressure off the Assembly by doing public hearings. So if it goes through basically as submitted, which there was a public hearing and testimony, then I would not see the need for a second public hearing in front of the Assembly. Now, if it was substantially changed or modified, then there may be a need for a second testimony, and I could immediately see how do I define that baby, and that would be very awkward.
Well, I'm intrigued with your concept of having an hour-long limitation, and also then how you separate out how the other members of the public may not necessarily be able to provide that input at the Assembly level, that maybe it occurs through the Community Council. I'm very curious about that, because I guess I'm still struggling with the idea that, in fact, everybody in the public gets a chance to come and address their issues to their elected officials. And you're not elected as a Planning Commission member, but the Assembly is. And can they really delegate that authority to you and not have to listen to the public when it gets to the Assembly?
They still have to listen to the public because they have to stand for election. But I'm just trying to, the process is going to ultimately fail as we grow bigger and bigger. And so I'd like to try to address that issue now, because we are going to continue to grow as a community. And I think part of the problem is our growth is we're going, and we're going to have to address that. And so we might as well try to address it now and come up with a process.
Okay, thank you.
We also have a comment and a question from Arla Strazinski.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I have to say that I vehemently disagree in that I think if you are an elected official, quote unquote, the buck stops here. And I think that the citizenry should have a direct line to those people that they did elect. Certainly ways to streamline, but I always felt that holding an elected position meant that you spent a lot of time listening, contacting, receiving public input, and then you finally had to press a button, yay or nay or whatever. So I think we can streamline it where we can, but never take away from that person who stood up there, made commitments. They ought to be on the line, and you should be able to address them. And that means extra meetings. Heaven knows, before we got a charter, we used to meet until 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning with the Planning Commission. That's not good government either, but we at least work to get the job done. So I do attend my community council, but it's very much people in, maybe they're not there next month or 2 months. They come on an issue-by-issue basis, and I don't see the thoughtful consideration by the whole body on a topic. So we just have to disagree on this one.
That's fine, and I respect your opinion. My one point would be that there are mechanisms other than a public testimony that you could receive that input. And I agree with you on the input, but we have many more means of communicating today than we had earlier.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to testify? I'd like to welcome Andy Holman, who is a member of our task force who just joined us. Andy serves as the executive director of the Anchorage Education Association, and his contribution to our efforts has been great and significant. I'd also like to recognize Assembly Member Amy DeBosky, came in from the Eagle River, and she's listening. And thank you, Amy, for coming to listen to the public hearing. We've only had one person who's testified so far, and this is our second member. Please come forward. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair,
You can pull it down. Can you pull them down so we want to make sure they can hear what?
Madam Chair,
Terrific.
task force members, Assembly Member Trainee, my name is Deirdre Brest, D-E-I-R-D-R-E, Brest.
Russ.
Brest. Thank you so much for your volunteer service, and I just wanted to say I loved each and every one of these recommendations, and I pray that the Assembly will consider them really carefully and perhaps make some changes accordingly. I worked for the Assembly for 13 years, and I remember many hours of listening to testimony about cat licensure and sexual orientation discrimination. And those things are really contentious, and they're very time-consuming, and they're very difficult. But, and more recent ones are another example, but they don't happen a lot. They're very few and far between. And I think that the core statement that all people who come to testify should be allowed to testify. I appreciated Mr. Ferguson's remarks. I had not considered some of his viewpoints with which I also disagree, but I think that it's important for throughout the process to have a buck stop here and be able to look into the eyes and hear the voice of the people that may or may not have elected you if you're an elected official. There's some minor housekeeping changes that, if it's all right, Chair Anvik, I can email to you at a later point, nothing substantive at all. There's some niceties in here that I really appreciated. I noticed a comment about the sign-up list.
If you can tell us what page you're on.
I'm on page 3, under public hearings. The sign-up sheet may be employed. Later on, it says that if anyone from the public requests it, it shall be employed, which is reasonable. My experience with the sign-up sheet is that it was a lot of work and creates angst and distraction from the process. I don't see any real benefit other than to get the spelling of people's names, because later on in paragraph C, under public hearings, the last sentence is, if a person is not available when called, they do not forfeit their chance to be heard. Essentially, if they sign up, they go to the bathroom, they're not here, you call their name, there's a lot of waiting, so-and-so isn't here, oh well. The sign-up sheet, from my perspective, would be meaningless, because if the person's not here, your recommendations say that they get to testify anyway later on, if they show up, presumably. So, the fact that it may be employed is great if the clerk's office wants to take that on, but I think it's distracting and a lot of extra work for not a lot of benefit. I really like the better signage at the entrance to the assembly members, the assembly chambers. I really like the comments about placing the public, instructions about the public process on the agenda. And I could go on, but I think that I made some notes when Mr. Ferguson was speaking. I made a note when he said force the community councils to engage or something, and I think we can't force anybody to do anything. The public process is a political tool. I think that our lives are a political environment, and I think that we need to use whatever processes that we can to affect the change that we want. And I think that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brest. Are there any questions? Carolyn?
Hey, Deidre, thanks for coming down. Quick question. We discussed multiple ideas, from a sign-up sheet to what the unions had employed with 37 as people were testifying in batch numbers or group numbers of 10. Part of the reason that we were considering a sign-up sheet and that we're looking at is we understand it's inconvenient. We understand that people necessarily don't want their names called out or don't really want to sign up. But part of the problem is a crowd control. And per the fire marshal, we can't have loops and loops of people standing in line.
Yes.
And we do have people that want to testify that really don't want to stand in line for 2 hours when they're standing over there by the time they get up to here. So
Good points.
that's why we're kind of still sitting at the sign-up sheet, but if you do have other suggestions or think of them, please let us know.
Thank you. Good points. And I wasn't here, although I am still a municipal employee, I wasn't here for the those particular public testimony, public hearings. I did notice that you had ideas about using Wilda Marston, which seem reasonable, and absolutely the fire marshal is the guy you got to please. So if I think of anything further, I certainly will forward it on.
Thank you very much. Could I mention that in the back of the room there is something called a press release, and on the bottom of the press release are both my email address and Amanda's email address. And so if people have comments that they'd like to send to us, if you use either of those email addresses, it'll make sure that everybody will receive a copy of your comments.
Sorry, Chairwoman Anvik, I forgot that I wanted to start off with saying how much I enjoyed and appreciated your introduction of all the task force members.
Quite all right. My pleasure.
And I had one more question, just real quickly. We're kind of focused in on the issues we care about. Do you know how much time was spent on cat licensing?
I can find out for sure tomorrow for you, but off the top of my head, I recall perhaps 3, maybe even 4 nights of continued public testimony. Ballpark, I think that was mid-90s somewhere. That's what I recall.
That's fine. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Cat, the question was how many nights were spent on cat licensing?
I remember reading about it in the paper, but I wasn't down here for that one.
It comes up every once in a while, and that means it's due again.
Deirdre, Mark Beckett introduced the last first cat licensing when they were be done in Anchorage again. We had 3 nights of testimony. We had lovely people coming up with pictures of Muffy in their arms. My cat never gets out of the house. And the neighbor
Good for you.
said, the cat not only gets out of the house, but you know what it does to my flowers? Leave deposits. You can't make people happy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Thank you, Ms. Brest. Would anyone else like to testify? Please come forward. Share. Be nice.
Oh, I was actually offering for him to go first.
Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Robie Sols, and I've been here for a few different testimonies. One of them was about the ordinance which you are seeking to help them reshape, and obviously here for AO37 as well. I do think that every person, and like yourselves, I believe that every person has the right to be heard. I think that as an employee of the municipality, my boss should have to hear me. And that boss, at this point, is the 11 elected representatives. I don't have, with my community council, which is an active one in Sand Lake, I don't have any way of electing those officials. I mean, it's a pretty small, closed-loop system. The people that are on there are the people that show up to the meetings, and that's about it. And it's not really well advertised, if you will, and it's not like they go to the whole Sand Lake community and say, here's a ballot, vote on the membership. So allowing them to be the voice for the people in the community is, I think, a disservice to the community. I mean, it's a channel. They do a lot of land use issues. I was there for several meetings where they discussed airport use, and the airport wanting to extend the runways and take up all the area out there at Clitheroe Center and out past the water treatment plant and all that. However, that was 3 years ago when they were discussing it. It's just now showing up in the paper. Going, okay, wait a minute here. There's a little bit of a disconnect. So I think that, much like yourselves, that this needs to be focused to the public participating in the process at every chance they can. Sometimes, it's tough to get all your ideas out in front of people in 3 minutes. It's tough, as we see it every time there's somebody up here to speak. Obviously, some people just take the liberty to keep going. We've seen that too. But I commend you all for your service. I thank you very much for standing up on behalf of us, especially some of us that have been here from the very beginning. Miss Giuliski, Miss Anvik, you guys have really helped set an example. And I'm glad you're here to help keep the tradition up.
Thank you, Mr. Soros. Question? Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the task force. My name is Bruce Dougherty, and I have been a resident of Anchorage for the last 21 years, on and off. First and foremost, I want to express my thanks and appreciation for the work that you've done to put this document together and the recommendations that you've made. We started out the evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. In the final stanza, so to speak, it's liberty and justice for all. Well, liberties are lots of different things. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, all the things that we hold dear. So in any event, this document's a great one. And one piece of housekeeping, though, in regards to the sign-up sheet, I think perhaps could be done electronically, maybe, prior to, so that if you're first on the list, you know that you could likely be the first in line. So that's just my only idea. So that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Dougherty. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
I just wanted to let you know there was a pretty robust conversation among task force members about the utilization of electronic tools. And certainly having an electronic sign-up sheet was discussed. And then the question was, does somebody who signed up what do we do with somebody who's sitting here versus somebody who isn't here? And do you have two lists, and how do you meld them together? Or take one from the live audience and take one from the electronic? I mean, it was just an interesting logistical challenge. Got any suggestions?
Not really, just I thought about the electronic piece. There's pros and cons to everything. So.
He was saying there are pros and cons to everything, and some people have access to electronic and some people do not. And so one notion was to actually have, that did make it in, is to actually have a mechanism whereby you could come in and use a computer and see all the materials that had come in as part of the electronic record. And so you could see the emails and the information that had come as part of it, and that you'd be able to have access to it that way. So, but thank you for your suggestion. Would anyone else like to testify? Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Catherine Adams, and thank you very much for your service to the community. I think this is a very impressive document, and especially that you affirm the principle that the process should be open, accessible, predictable, inclusive, and transparent. And I think the suggestions you've made are excellent, and I think bugs could be worked out on things like sign-up sheet. But because I do think that some people don't have access to the electronic things, I like the idea of the kiosk in several public buildings for people without computer and or internet access. I just would like to say that the assembly is a gatekeeper for the public process, and if they close that gate, then it's only either their individual constituents, their own personal agenda, even for perfectly ethical people, if you don't have input outside of your own knowledge base, you end up with groupthink, which we've seen over and over throughout history has had some very serious consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We also received your written testimony earlier. Thank you. Are there any other people who would like to testify this evening? Please come forward. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Katie Nolan, Nolan, and wow, what you guys have done has been amazing, and you've covered so many incredible areas. It's mind-boggling. I've got a couple of suggestions after years of doing this kind of thing. On page 2, you're in item number 1, the second paragraph. Not only the Assembly needs to be dealing with standards like these, but also the other bodies that community councils and other people deal with, including the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Planning Board, and the Urban Design Commission. These kind of rules, occasionally they're going to have contentious issues. We've seen them where we have the same type of issues, and we need to look at applying these rules to those regulatory bodies. On your page 3, it's item 3, public hearings, item B. You're talking about community councils there in that last sentence. But we also have other neighborhood and community organizations, HALO, homeowners associations, that should also have a 5-minute time frame if they're officially giving an opinion. They should be awarded the same amount of time as a community council. Let's see, on your page 4, your substitute versions, anytime we're dealing with an S version, that means there's a substantial difference. And it should go back through the whole process, including, let's put it off till the next meeting so everyone can look at the S version, compare the two, instead of trying to do it at the back of the room. That becomes impossible, especially when you get items that are laid on the table that are S versions. And I really appreciate you addressing that issue because it's tough. Do I already have a question?
Thank you, Ms. Nolan. Are there any questions? Carolyn? Carolyn and Tim? Jim?
I wanted to ask Katie, where do you draw the line, or how do you define what an organization is, or a group that qualifies them to have 5 minutes versus 3? And there was a lot of discussion in this group about what that meant, and it all comes back to the community councils are the charter-recognized organization and group, and that's why I think we've retained that for that organization. Because if it's a homeowners association, then what else?
Well, you could define it by something that has an elected body, a nonprofit status, and is, I want to say maybe a name associated with it, a true name that's community involvement. HALO, for example, is an organization loosely involving 8 area community councils, and so there's a real good opinion there that sometimes you don't get with the smaller councils that don't meet so regularly. So they can offer an opinion that represents those councils despite whether or not the councils have met that year.
So would churches that are organized with the board and that fall into that category?
I think then you're talking about the same thing, even though it's a not-for-profit status, and I apologize there, but that's the same thing as a business representation instead of a community. I would see a line there.
Okay. Thank you.
Carolyn Ramsey?
I think Tim pretty much went where I wanted to go. I guess my only concern is when you start talking about all these little micro-organizations, because that's kind of what it can turn into, they really, in my personal opinion, should be working with their local community councils. And I know that they don't all meet as regularly as they should, or they're not meeting in the summer and this kind of stuff. So maybe we need to look more at the community councils used to be much more involved than what they are today, especially back when the charter was written.
Yeah.
So it's something that we as a community and as a city really should bring back to the table. And I know we have young people here from East High, and that's part of it right there, is getting them involved in their community councils and bringing the younger people in as well.
Well, if I can answer that, I know from my community council experience that we've had situations where we have two very opposed viewpoints from organizations and homeowners associations. And I think it's important to give each one of those representations whether or not the community council has taken a stand on it. Okay.
Arla Strazinski?
I am troubled, but appreciated your, I think we're all set here, to learn all these modern ways.
Oh, I'm just glad I don't have a button up here.
No, I appreciated your comment on the substitute version. That is something that really bothers me, sitting out there and seeing what may be a totally changed ordinance before the assembly. So I think we need to talk about whether this is sufficient in the way it's currently stated here. But that is bothersome because you really don't know what the heck is.
Well, especially for the person at home. You can't follow it along if you're at home.
No, but that was a good point. Thank you.
Additional questions?
Oh, I'm not through yet. Can I keep going?
Sure.
Sorry, I've got another page here. On your item 9, it's on your last page 6. There is a real disconnect about talking to your representative, if that representative is teleconferencing in. And although it's a real touchy subject, I really think it's something that you ought to look at. You've got somebody calling in and making a vote over the phone. They're not here. They're not following the S versions, if there are any. They're not following anything that's laid on the table. They're just voting. It's a faceless person you're dealing with instead of an elected body. Oh boy, here we go.
Mr. Barnett?
Okay, Katie, by the way, that wasn't permitted back in the old days when, you know, those of us who were on the assembly some time ago. Do you think the assembly should abolish people listening in by telephone?
Listening in and voting by telephone?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's my personal opinion. Okay. We also need to, another addition here, we need to address all of our public meetings being televised, including the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Urban Design Commission, Planning Board, not just a couple of bodies, but every public meeting where actual decisions are being made should be on the Muni channel. We've already got the staff here. And I've got my ideas for contentious public hearings, including part of the challenge is getting people out of their seats and down here to move the crowd through. And there are really easy ways, I think, to solve that we've got some extremely competent security staff that are here at those events. They could line people up at the side of the road, have them standing there ready to go instead of waiting for people to get their stuff together and come down here, which takes an enormous amount of time. But I'll email all those ideas in.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Oops, Katie.
Would anyone else like to testify? Welcome.
Thank you. Chair and members of the task force, I'm Kathy Gleason. I'm currently president of Turning Community Council, and it's encouraging to hear all this discussion about community councils. I think it's very advantageous. We do play an important role in our community, but certainly I would not like to see our council meetings substitute for hearings in front of the assembly and people having the opportunity to come and testify. Thank you so much for all of your work on this. I'm not going to take the time to praise everything that's good in here. If you don't hear me say it, that means I wholeheartedly support it. There are just a few things that caught my attention, nothing too earth-shaking, that I want to point out. I always have more questions than answers, though, so don't ask me to solve them. I'm just going to throw them out. Okay, on page 2, and it runs into page 3, the very last 2D, where you talk about location of municipal kiosks in the lobby of the assembly chambers and in other public buildings. I think that's awfully vague, and I think that probably should be firmed up a little bit, because are we talking about, I don't know, the Health and Human Services building and it could get kind of crazy. So I think that needs to be more defined. With regard to F on page, continuing F on that same section on page 3, it says Facebook and other forms of social media should be employed to get the word out. And I really have said this over and over for many years now. I wish the municipality would use the Federation of Community Councils as a means to disseminate public notices, that they actually contract with FCC, because FCC has almost all of the community council email databases, and people could indicate, just like we do now, to get action notices, the Muni alerts, for all sorts of other things besides planning issues. And you can check which ones you want to receive and which ones you don't want to receive, and then that could all be coordinated with Federation of Community Council email lists. I think that just could be a real value to so many of us who want to get notices and don't find time or remember to surf the Muni website every day to try and keep track of everything that's going on. Still on page 3, number 3, under public hearings, C, the whole thing about a sign-up sheet may be employed to facilitate the management of a public hearing. That leaves open the door of one being generated for every hearing, which we all have acknowledged that it's so far and few between where you have a massive amount of people show up for a hearing. So I think I testified about this at your last hearing. I really think that this shouldn't open the door for the need or the desire for somebody to say, we need a sign-up sheet for every hearing, and that really should be more defined as to when that sign-up sheet would come into play. And then on to E, it says, if a member of the public requests the use of a sign-up sheet, this management tool shall be employed. It doesn't really define when that would happen. When should a request by a public person be made? Would it need to be made before the meeting? Because you can't be in the middle of a hearing and all of a sudden I come up to the microphone and say, I request we have a sign-up sheet. I mean, it would be completely disruptive during an assembly meeting to then start making requests for sign-up sheets. So I think if you go down that road and allow that to take place, it should be defined as to when a person would be able to make that request. Excuse me. On page 4, under G, I think maybe something instead of having hearings may be set for Saturdays, that third line on page 4, perhaps it could be worded something like special meetings may be scheduled outside of regularly scheduled Tuesday meetings, just so that you leave the door open for a special meeting might be able to be scheduled on Thursday or Friday or Sunday. I know that the Assembly has scheduled at least one special meeting on a Saturday that I remember so long ago. Would have been 19 years ago, in 1994, during an airport municipal school district land swap that I was heavily involved with. This was a standing room only on a Saturday, and it happened to be my birthday. And I don't know why I remember that, probably because it was my birthday. So I know they happen on Saturdays, but they potentially could happen on other days of the week as well. So maybe you don't want to limit yourself with that wording. Going down to I in the same section, I would delete the words "if possible," because I know that on Channel 10 or whatever channel may have been on in the past, the municipal channel, you could see the title of the ordinance, so that if you were kind of washing the dishes or making dinner and you could glance up and you know that you want to come down here to speak to something that, F3, but if you glance up, you don't want to listen to it, you glance up, you have no idea where the Assembly is at on the agenda, and you could go, they're still on B4, so I've got 40 more minutes probably before I have to get down here. Why that disappeared at some point, I don't know. I know it's possible. I don't think you need to say if possible. I think you absolutely should recommend that be put back in place. And it says on the bottom of the TV screen, and we all know, I certainly know what you meant, but, just of semantics, perhaps you should refer to the municipal channel 10, so be more specific on that. Going down, same page, number 4A, it says that changes from an original version, the whole S version topic, which is certainly needs to be addressed, be posted on the municipal website, but you don't see it say how far in advance of the public hearing. And I don't know if that should be defined or not. I mean, it could be posted an hour before the hearing, and people may not realize that it ever pops up there before they get in their car and come down. Let's see, moving on to page 5, number 7A. I think it would be better, more clear, because I actually had to read it a second time to get it. Instead of referring to this room as the Assembly meeting room, I think Assembly chambers would be more appropriate. Again, all of this is pretty minor stuff, and I appreciate you letting me wade through these suggestions. Number 8 on the same page, under Community Council Collaboration, the third line starts out at, second sentence, it is desirable that controversial topics be reviewed by community councils. Some versions of some people's version of controversial is not everybody's version of controversial. Some people probably would never have dreamed that cat licensing would be controversial. Who knew? But I remember that whole thing. And so, how you define controversial and then say that should go before the council and be reviewed, but that doesn't, is going to be tough to define and determine. So just comment on that. And lastly, on page 6, last page, number 9, under Assembly Presence, I know that I think somebody spoke to it at your last public hearing, and I thought that was perhaps a better alternative than saying that Assembly people should limit their dinner break to 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something. The Assembly meetings start at 5 p.m. Why not just start them at 5:30 or 5:45 or 6? Give an opportunity for them to have their dinner before the meeting starts, so that once the meeting starts, there is no break. Because those Assembly breaks, when the chair says, we'll be back in 15 minutes, they easily creep into 20 and 25 and sometimes 30 minutes, just because people start chatting and it's kind of lackadaisical in getting everybody corralled back into the room and in front of microphones and in seats. So I think that might be a better alternative to consider if you're going to dictate, kind of how they actually run their meetings, start times and dinner breaks and so forth. That's all I have. Again, thank you so much for all of your work.
Thank you, Ms. Gleason. Go ahead, Bob. Churchill.
Yeah, through the chair. Kathy, thanks a million. That couldn't have been anything but time-consuming to go through all of that. Thank you. But the thing we struggled with the kiosk piece is we didn't want to limit it. I see where you're going with that. We don't want to end up with one small kiosk that everybody's at. But when we were vague on where they should be, we wanted to give enough options that there may be places that we would put them that we might not think of right now. That's the reason, at least on that my memory is that we're sort of leaving that door open. So that's just some of our thinking.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify? Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Jason Allward. What I have to say will not nearly be as thorough as her testimony, but I'd like to start out by thanking all of you for your dedication and commitment towards getting this public process right. I, too, was denied my right to speak regarding AO 37, and I'd have to disagree with the gentleman that spoke first this evening. The reason all this has come up because a very questionable law was passed. I believe decision makers need to be held accountable for their actions. Laws should not be rushed and hastily decided in the middle of the night. I too believe that S versions severely impact the process, and I begin to wonder even if the assembly members are truly making informed decisions when they sit there. Things are happening very fast. So I really question that. In addition, the thing that I find most disturbing is that several hundred people had been giving public testimony regarding what they thought was the most recent version. And then there's an S version, or an S1, or an S2. So I think it's kind of a slap in the face of all those that get up to speak. I think that part of the process is broken. Anyway, I think from what I've read on all of your guys' ideas, I think you fine folks are doing a great job moving this thing forward, and I'd really just like to say I appreciate your hard work on this. Thank you.
Joelle?
Through the chair, Jason, the sign-up sheet. As we both know, the sign-up sheet is a source of concern and also a remedy to a problem. The source of concern is that it can be used as a tool to exclude people from testifying, and the remedy is it keeps the community groups from having to be in charge of wrangling a crowd when, in fact, a large crowd is generated. Well, can you talk a little bit about your thoughts about the sign-up sheet and how it could be, because we're recommending that we use it, we're not being specific as to when, but this is the part I've struggled with a little bit. And so I just want to know, based on, we've been through the same thing together, what are your thoughts on sign-up sheets?
I haven't given this part a lot of thought, Joelle. I thought we did a fantastic job. Joanne English did a great job corralling all the folks. The difficult part is that you have people inside these chambers. You have people on the list that are outside the chambers. And that's where it's hard for her to herd those people. I know we had groups. We went by waves of groups. I think that was helpful, but still you had people that came in and got numbers that weren't part of groups of people that were sitting in the chambers. So how do you get those people in? Joel, I don't know what the answer is. I don't have any great suggestions. I haven't given it a lot of thought. That's what I was counting on you guys for. So, sorry.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to testify? Welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Bill Sims, and just a couple of comments. I appreciate y'all taking the time to volunteer for this. As far as on your recommendations, page 3, public hearings, section B, for individual speakers, and a 5-minute time limit for designated representatives of community council. I belong to the Operating Engineers Local 302. I represent over 1,000 members that live within the Anchorage municipality. At times, I believe that it may save time if I were the designated speaker for over 1,000 people, rather than having 3 minutes of each one of these people come in here to testify. So limiting it to community councils, I believe, is a bad recommendation. Section 4, subsection D, page 4 there. D, as in Delta. If there was a new version, it should be evaluated to determine if it should be treated as a new ordinance, and the public hearing process should be started again. The problem with that is who's to determine, or who is to evaluate? Is that the Assembly? Is it this task force? Is this task force disseminated after this process is over? So who's to evaluate that? As far as your question, Joelle, with the issue with lists, my only issue with it is that if we are only allowing those people to speak that are on the list, then it would exclude those people that didn't get a chance to get their name on the list. So that is my only issue with that.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
For point of clarification, what we have suggested is that there is a sign-up sheet. There is a sign-up sheet. It is exclusively for crowd control, and it doesn't end. It rolls. So as long as there is public testimony to be received, and it rolls over to a follow-up night, the sign-up sheet is available for the next time as well.
Absolutely.
It's a simple mechanism to be able to allow the clerk to take charge of the sign-up process. There was some consternation about the idea that nobody's in charge of the sign-up process now.
Sure.
It is an organic thing that just kind of happens
Sure.
naturally, or groups who have large contingencies who show up, they're basically put in the position of being responsible
Absolutely.
for running the show here in the assembly chambers, and we all find that to actually not be ideal either.
Sure.
So I want to just address your question. The idea is that the sign-up sheet rolls from event to event, and when there's a last person on the list, and the last person says, is there anybody left to testify, and the answer is no, then that's when it's over.
I can appreciate that.
Okay. Another question from Tim Potter. Turn your mic on, Tim.
That at the end of the conclusion of the list, then the Assembly Chair has to ask, is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Sure, I can
so
appreciate
that it really is a control mechanism rather than an absolute. If you're not on the list, you don't get to speak.
I thought that the process of giving testimony, public testimony through the AO 37 ordeal, I don't even want to call it an ordeal, but I thought that process was handled very good. It did help control the crowd. It could probably be refined, but I thought the process was actually a good idea. The part of the process I didn't appreciate was, if I can recall correctly, that was Ernie Hall's, I don't want to call it his idea, but he wanted people to sign up and promised everybody that they would have their opportunity to speak, but that didn't happen.
I understand.
I also was one of those that didn't get afforded the opportunity to speak. Part of the problem with that was, as a union representative that represents many of the folks that work for this city, I took it upon myself, along with Jason Allward there, to speak last, to give our membership and those folks the opportunity to speak first. So we didn't get that opportunity to.
I understand. Carolyn Ramsey?
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming down. I have a question because it is something that we wrestled with as far as and Tim had mentioned earlier, the community councils are actually part of our charter, which is why we looked at the 5 minutes for them and the 3 minutes for individuals. When it comes into 5 minutes for groups, what's a group? And how are you going to define that? And at the same time, I understand as far as 37, where you're representing, 1,000 people within your membership. But then when you look at civil rights issues, when we had 64 here, are you willing to give the churches each 5 minutes over a civil rights issue? So that's where we kind of turn to our municipal charter where it states community councils and why we looked at that.
Sure, I can appreciate that, but I personally haven't been involved with my community council at all. So I don't understand that process, but I can see how some folks believe that if their community council, the board of their community council, doesn't see eye to eye with whatever the issue may be, that it may not be represented here or through this process the way they feel it should be. So I appreciate being able to stand right here and address the elected officials that this group has elected to hear me out. And not only for those folks to hear me out, like I forget who it was that stated it earlier, I think it was you, that not only am I talking to you, but I'm talking to those folks on television, the folks of this city. So I appreciate that process even more than the community council part.
Right. Thank you. I understand that. Thank you.
Mr. Sims, Mr. Barnett has a question.
I gather you participated in this Ordinance 37 public hearing process?
I was here every night of public testimony, correct?
Okay. One of the issues that Ms. Nolan actually brought up earlier was this idea of people who are listening in by telephone to a public hearing not really getting a sense of what's going on. Was there any of that in the 37 public hearing process that you're aware of?
Not that I was aware of. I wasn't aware of anyone that was on the telephone aside from an assembly person who was not here attending.
Well, that's exactly what I was driving
at. Okay.
So there was an assembly member who was participating by telephone, listening by telephone?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have an opinion about whether that's, whether that should, as a practice that should be allowed? Do you think that assembly members getting drift of what's going on?
Everybody needs some personal time, whether they're on vacation. We can't dictate when these folks are gone on their personal leave. I appreciate that they're on the phone listening in, whether they're on personal time or just screw-off time. I don't know. But I personally believe that they should be here, but I also respect that, some folks can't be here all the time. So how do we fix that or address that? I don't know.
Tim Potter has another question.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to follow up on Jim's comments a little bit or question. I'll go out on a limb here and I'll probably upset a few assembly people, but just because someone's not here, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Because I also question whether or not an assembly person should be able to attend by telephonic. And I understand the reasons why they may, and I understand the reasons why it might not be appropriate. I don't know if I've come to a conclusion myself, but I can tell you that there are some assembly people that take their job so seriously that they will be better prepared and attend by phone and be more familiar and up to speed on the material than some members that are here in the chambers in attendance. So, we need to be careful how we judge people.
I get that too, but at some point, I could be standing here in front of a bunch of monitors
and that's
nobody
question.
Be here.
And but what we have not covered, and we're getting back together on Thursday after we've heard the public testimony, and one of the things that we may want to consider is, what is the appropriateness of telephonic attendance, and it should it be limited? Should it be done away with? Should it be for one or two people only, and no more than that, what should it be? So I really appreciate you talking about it.
I don't know how to address that particular issue right there. I don't know if that should be a separate issue on public hearing testimony or rules of the assembly. I don't know, but that's something that probably should be addressed.
Well, I can swear that it is a little bit, and the person might know who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to mention names.
I know who you're talking about.
When you hear tinkling ice during the phone call, it really does raise it to a whole nother level.
Sure.
So, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Any other questions? Carolyn? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. I just have one quick question, which is, would you like to take the responsibility for speaking on behalf of your members to the exclusion of allowing your members to testify?
I leave that up to my membership. At some points, it depends on what the issue may be. It could be a very small issue or it won't take very much time. It could be an issue where we all align on, and they may say, you know what, rather than all of us getting up there one at a time, how about you take this one? So I consider that a case-by-case issue, maybe.
I understand. And what I was thinking is, there were many times when I served on the Assembly when the place would be packed and they'd say, everybody who agrees with this, stand up. And then you get a visual that says, okay, I got it. But they never lost their right to actually come here and talk as well. So I'm just doing the trade-off of...
and I don't know, if I were to come to an Assembly meeting to publicly testify, and if I was standing next to 5 of my members and I came up here and I said, these guys would like to divert their time to me, can you give me 5 minutes? I think that would be justifiable.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Sims.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify? Welcome.
Hi. Richard Braun. I'm just a guy. I'm not a union guy. I'm not an organizer. I'm not an organizer who comes to filibuster you guys by bringing as many bodies as I can. I come for me when there's an issue that I want to talk about. 3 minutes, barely enough. Giving these guys 5 minutes, that's Animal Farm. Okay? Some pigs are better than or some animals are better than other animals? No. Arla's had it right. This is a public forum with elected officials who need to hear from the people who have a problem or an issue or want to make a comment or whatever to the elected official who's going to make an effect on their lives. Everybody's equal. That guy that's just here, he can come up and speak for 3 minutes. He can speak as whether he's a union rep or as a person, but he gets 3 minutes, if that's what I get. That's fair. Otherwise, you're just rigging the game. Telephones? You got a quorum of bodies here, let them be on the telephone, because there is things that do take people away occasionally. Although, it should be justified and not just some whim because I want to be away this weekend or this week, I'm not going to attend. I think the Assembly members fight to get on this job. They should be here. But sometimes maybe they can't and a telephone works, as long as they're actually listening and paying attention. I come here fair often. Sometimes I don't even know if they're there or not because it's just dead silence. The members here can't even get them to respond sometimes, so they need some discipline on that too. Public testimony is, it's a circus sometimes. We've got Assembly members who bring in a choir who come up here and one after the other and speak because they're all for what the Assembly member wants. Somebody else, say maybe me, who doesn't like it, comes along and I get 3 minutes and no seconds. If it's pro for the Assembly member's opinion, they get 3 minutes plus if they want 10 or 15 more, they get it. They even get pumped. Say, have you said everything you want to say? Is there any more that you want to explain? Come on, please, give me some more, you know. And other people, man, you get cut off at the knees. There ought to be a little more equity there, and I charge the chair to do that, because certain assembly members love to talk and hog the microphone, and will butt in and disrupt the meeting and not even take their turn. There needs to be some discipline within the assembly. That causes almost as much disruption as if maybe somebody coming up here. Sign-up sheet. Well, I got mixed emotions on the sign-up sheet. I like it and I don't like it. I like it because then everybody gets their turn. They just have to be patient. Everybody in this town can come here. Whether it's one night, 2 nights, 3 nights, they can all come here. Nobody's telling them not to come here. A sign-up sheet provides a little organization, a little predictability, and that's good. But it also lets everybody sit down, which is bad, because that drags the meeting out longer and longer and longer. If they had to stand here like they would stand to get into Disneyland, maybe then when their feet get tired, they'd leave and not say the same thing that 29 people before them, who were all brought down here on a bus or fed free pizza so they would come down here, and say the same thing over and over and over and over, and the next day come back and say the same thing over and over. What did they contribute? Not much. That's when raising hands might be the best way to deal with it. Because if you're not hearing anything new, you're filibustered. That's all it is. It's dragging it out to see who the last man standing can be the one who wins. That's not the way it should be. You should be here to hear from me, from him, from her, from whoever, as long as there's useful information and they get a chance to present an issue to you. Because as an elected, well, not you, as the elected, formerly, as an elected official, you need to hear it. Because you're hard to get a hold of. I send emails out. Maybe if I send it to every assembly member, I might get 2 replies acknowledging the fact that it was received. Maybe not read, but at least received. The rest of them, it's a void. I might as well be sending it to Mars. I don't know what effect it has. So I have to come down here in person because there they are. And then you get a chance to actually present your information to them, and you know they got it. Even though some people don't listen. They're too busy doing their blogs, too busy typing on their computers, doing I don't know what, or just not paying any bloody attention whatsoever. That's a problem too, and I don't know how to fix that other than elect better people. Electronic sign-up, I'm against that. You're going to get filibustered to death with that. I don't know what purpose that's going to serve, and how do you know who's sending it anyway? Is the clerk going to have to check to see if the email sending address matches to the name that wants to sign up? Or is some organization going to do it for all the members, and then you don't, just to pack the house and make it impossible for me to get in maybe? So I don't think electronic sign-up is going to add it. That's a gimmick. If it's important enough to speak here, it's important enough to come here and sign up. Or sit and wait your turn. S versions, sometimes they come too fast and furious. They should be a little bit better planning on the part of the assembly. Although at times, an S version saves us from a very bad original ordinance. If the assembly can manage to come up with the words to write one. And that's a show in itself. It's bad sausage making when the assembly does it on site. But as long as if they can get it done in time so it's on the agenda, everybody in town can go on the website, look at the agenda and see what's coming up. Decide if they need something to say, if they understand it, or what version what are they really going to talk about. So guys that come here because they got a phone call from the Union Hall saying, get down there and talk, but they don't know a thing about the issue, and they don't even know there's an S version because they haven't studied it, haven't thought about it, and the union didn't tell them about it. What good does that do? That's a waste of time. People that want to come down here are the ones who want to come down here and have something to say, and that's what you're here for, to hear. And oftentimes that's not what we're getting. We're just getting, who can last longest. I just got this as I walked in the door. I had to steal it from Dick over there because there aren't any more out there. That's another problem. Clerk's office. Sometimes you don't have enough copies of anything out there, especially S versions, that the public can come in and even read, when there's one. So copies would be nice. I know it's money, but...
No, she's going to go make some more right now. We didn't know we had run out.
I don't know if anybody else is sneaking in. I started watching you guys on TV, and I just said, I got to go down, because...
Welcome.
You guys are talking about important stuff, and I don't want it all being pushed by non-citizens but organizations. Organizations have plenty of power. They got the ear of the politicians all the time, because they got the checkbook. And giving them more time and giving them special privileges, no. This is a fight of the survival of the fittest to get your 3 minutes, because if you can't come down here and talk, then you must not have much to say, or you don't care, all right?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Are there any questions? Carolyn?
Hi, thanks for leaving your house and coming down.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to let you know, when we were talking about the electronic sign-up, we went over it and over it and over it and spent quite a bit of time on it. And one of the things that we came up with was the fact that people would have to have an individual identifier when you would have to create, and this would take work on the Assembly's part and through the municipality's part, and we understand that an account would have to be created for each and every individual. When that account was created, it would be with your name, with your address, and other miscellaneous things, and we hadn't come up with what it would be yet. And then it would be password account and password protected as well. So it wouldn't be something that some organization could blanket sign up, 500 people under one account. It would be individually based. And the reason we came up with this was because when there was 37 and people wanted to testify, when there was 64 a number of years ago and people wanted to testify, there wasn't even parking available for people. So we were trying to find a way that when there is no parking, the fire marshal said, you're at capacity. How do people actually have the ability to become engaged?
Fire marshal can handle this room pretty easy, I think. Whether people are standing in the aisle or sitting in that seat, as long as the body count doesn't exceed this room, I don't see a difference. Because if the fire alarm went off, you, me, and everybody else would be standing in this aisle trying to get to the door anyway. So what are we saving? As long as you keep the body count in here within the limits of the room, use the Marston for overflow, have a sign-up sheet for people who can't stay all night because they got to go to work tomorrow, so they can come back on the second or the third or the fourth day or whatever it takes. Everybody should have a shot, but the electronic, I don't see the advantage.
Well, I can tell you from personal
you want me to
experience,
sign up with a password and
it would be optional. It would be, you would have a choice between coming down and physically signing up, or for some people, they would have the ability to sign up electronically. So it wouldn't be a limited only electronic or a limited only in person. It would give somebody an option to sign up either way. Because I know specifically for me, during 64, I couldn't get in the chambers to sign up. Fire marshal
did you
cut
come
off.
back the next day?
Oh dear, I was here every bloody day that happened.
Yeah, I was here a couple days
So,
too.
trust me.
I made it. I testified.
But the point was, there were days you could not get in the door. So instead of continually, it would allow you to sign up electronically. That was all we were looking at, was just another avenue for people.
I think if you come here, it's full, sign the paper, go home, and then come back on the day when it's not so full.
Thank you. We also have a question from Tim Potter.
I was interested in something you said, and I'm guilty.
Only one thing?
Well, no, I really
did better
appreciate
than
all the things that you said, but there was one that I wanted to go back to, and it's.
Can you use this thing a little more?
I'm guilty of probably the same thing that I'll say that you're guilty of, and that's when you refer to people that get up and say the same thing that the person in front of them said, and the same 27 people. every one of us are a citizen, and we may all have the same views on an issue, and we still should all be able to reserve the right to be able to say that, even if the person that just happened to be in line in front of us
I agree with
stole
that.
our thunder or got to say what we had intended to say. So,
I agree with that. What I was trying to describe is people come here with a little script in hand, and they're reading the script they were given, and that's all they know. That's what I meant. That's the filibuster effect that I was talking about. Now, if the individual wants to present his own opinion, not the script that was handed out at the door maybe or whenever, you can tell. When you sit here and listen to 100 people, you can tell the ones that have something to say and the ones who came and were told to say this. Right? You've sat in here many a time. I think you've heard it.
I think I've probably been in this chamber for more assembly meetings than anybody here. Ask my wife. Tuesday nights, I'm usually not home.
I get that too.
We talked about this, and it's really an issue that's difficult. How can you tell somebody that because they have a little cheat sheet, or they're from a union, or they're from a church, their public testimony isn't important, or they should get cut off? I mean, this and what this panel or task force really came up with is that when you start doing that, all of a sudden you're down a slippery slope, and it's really difficult once you start down it. So everybody gets to speak, because that's the way the charter
I
does
said
it.
that earlier. Everybody should.
Yep.
It just gets questionable sometimes when it's a dog and pony show, and they're brought here to pack the house, not really because of a heartfelt reason to come down on their own, because they care. You know, like I did tonight. Right. You know, I was sitting there nice and comfy in my chair watching and listening, and then I thought, no, I can't let this slide by because there's too much of the guy before me coming in and trying to organize it for you.
I know you just want to say happy birthday to Arla, so. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Did I miss that? Happy birthday.
You know, if there's one commonality in this entire task force, and there's people up here with lots of diverse views, which is what a task force should be, and it is that everybody should get a chance to speak if they want to come and address their
I agree with that.
officials.
I'm not saying to cut them off.
So you know, we're just going to have to live with the fact that there's going to be people that are going to line up, and the union's going to tell them, or the church is going to tell them, or somebody's going to tell them to come and say something. And, you know, that's where it's going to be up to the elected officials to, you know, pass judgment. That's what they're here for. That's what we elect them for. So.
Well, when you have an open, not open mic, but open comments, you're subject to that. I think a lot of times you can tell from the way it's said, the fact there's a sticker here, or a certain color shirt here, or you can tell when the house is being packed versus here's people that would come on their own no matter what.
You know, it's interesting. There's a policy here or a rule through the chair. Yes?
I just want you to ask questions and not debate with the gentleman.
Yeah, I'm not. I wanted to ask the question. Since you bring up the buttons, there is a rule or policy that's been in place for a long time that there's no signs that can be brought into the chambers. I hadn't really thought of the issue, and we did not talk about it as a group. Should there be a limitation about being able to have patches or other political statements, so to speak, in the audience while you're here? And
if you say you can have signage, this will be a circus, and the people in the back row won't be able to see, and they might as well be watching on TV. I think you need a limitation on it, otherwise you lose control of your meeting.
No,
we have other people who want to testify, gentlemen. So I would like to suggest.
Oh, a suggestion of what?
That Tim stop debating you.
Yeah, I was just really trying to ask the question,
That's a good question.
Does he have a feeling about having people having patches and all that in the assembly chambers?
You might need to come up just with a good definition of what a sign is, though, so you know what the cutoff, you know, what's reasonable and what's not reasonable.
Okay, thank you.
You know, no 30 by 40 signs, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, thank you.
Would anyone else like to testify? Thank you.
Good Good evening. My name is Andre McLeod, and I think some of the answers that Tim Potter is looking for might be found in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We do have individual rights. As much as we can choose to be part of an organization, we still maintain our individual rights. So I think you've got your rights of free speech, and that entails wearing signs. So I think the answer is available already, unless you want to go into the courtroom. So, and that, I'm glad it was brought up, because that is what I wanted to bring up and mention, is the matter of individual rights. Everybody, whether you're in Anchorage or whether you're in Portland, Maine, no matter where you are in the United States, you maintain those individual rights. And so I hope that whatever's done by this task force doesn't muck any of those rights up in order to get some kind of control to controversial issues. So please do not diminish those rights. The question of abolishing the telephone participation, I used to work for a board and a staffer for a board, and in the bylaws there were actually parameters as to how many meetings can be done, how many meetings you can be absent by, how many meetings you can telephone into. But if you are affirming that you want your public hearings and any votes and everything else to be transparent, I would think that you would want your assembly members here and, abolish the telephone. Who's to say who's in the presence of the absent assembly member who's voting? What lobbyists are there giving them information? What special interest is around that particular assembly member who's absent? What is he being told or she being told to vote? So the transparent factor is part of whether one would allow assembly members to be absent, and I would say abolish it. Let's see. The reason this happened, from what I understand and what I've observed, is that, as the gentleman before me said, there needs to be more discipline by assembly members. There's a certain power, the dynamics of power going on, and you've got, whether it's the one side or the other has the power on the assembly, all of a sudden, if they have the votes, it becomes a power kind of thing. So lost in all this is that we as individuals have power too. We are not here, you are not here to tell us what to do. You collectively, please don't take it for, you serve us. Assembly members serve us. We have the power. So with that, for some reason or another, some of these assembly members have gotten power hungry because they've got the votes and they can ramrod anything through. And that's not just. And so you have the people who get fairly angry. Each of those people in that organization that you assembly members might see as an organization as if they're one of a mob of people, that mob of people are very angry people, and they are individuals who have come together but still maintain those individual rights to say, we're angry that you're ramrodding things through. And they have a right to do that. The Constitution protects that right. So if there's anything that you could do is to maybe add at the last page under the assembly presence something about not implying a motive. The Roberts Rules provides a guide as to how to conduct meetings, and one of them is you cannot imply motives to each other. And I simply ask that you extend that to each of the individual citizens who come here and take their time to speak before this body, which is such an intimidating thing to do. I've never gotten used to it as much as I come up here and talk in front of you guys. I'm still just as nervous. I've got the knots in my stomach. But you know what? Don't imply a motive. I'm here for whatever the hell I want to be here for. Do not imply why I'm here. I will tell you why I'm here. So if you could just add, I'm sorry to say, but you're going to have to add it. Do not imply a motive to people who come. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Any questions? Senator Astrid Giuliski has a question for you.
Yeah, just, Andre, the 9B talks about really assembly members encouraged to listen attentively. What that says to me is be courteous, be open, listen. You don't feel that's adequate wording?
No. I think it has to be clear and concise. Words like filibuster are being used even tonight. When I came to a prior assembly meeting where they spoke about the public hearings, there were some assembly members who were also, it became just de rigueur to just say their motive was and their intent was and they wanted this and, you know, labor unions, you know them, and so it becomes a stereotype. It becomes this thing that just, I mean, that, quite frankly, that was what exacerbated this whole thing to culminate into us being here, trying to protect our rights, is because of the lack of discipline and judgment by the assembly members to just keep their mouths shut. They wanted to imply a motive and make a point. They wanted to make a political point, as if they have a monopoly to do that. We have that monopoly too, as citizens, each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to testify? Welcome.
Hi, my name's Phil Isley, and I live in Spenard. And first of all, I'd like to apologize because I didn't make your first meeting. And I have some concerns to share with you. It's probably just my time to come up and whine a little bit. But the problem I have with the whole open process is a lot of times it doesn't do you any good to have public testimony if the Assembly's already made up their mind. And for an example, I would use the meeting that we just had on fluoride. Before I ever went to the meeting, I heard on the radio that they were going to continue to use fluoride in the water. But they were going to have the meeting anyway because they had an open meeting and that was their policy. But they'd already made up their mind, which if you come down and testify and you know that it's going to go on deaf ears, pretty soon you don't come down and testify anymore. And I came down here just to kind of watch. I've always been a fan of a circus. And I listened to a lot of people testify for and a lot of people testify against. But you could tell that it was already made up. None of the testimony was really based on science or facts. It was all subjective. Both sides made good points, but it really didn't matter because the decision had already been made. And to go back a little bit further, I attend a lot of public meetings. I go to 2 community council meetings a month, generally, sometimes more. And Spenard Road comes to mind. It takes them, I think they've been working on it for 10 years now. And they have an ongoing controversy of whether it should be 4 lanes or 3 lanes. And it's a constant battle. And the one side makes their point, and then the other side makes their point. And I've been at a community council meeting where the people are sitting there, and the night before they'd been at a Spenard Road meeting, and it was undecided, and had somebody from the city come in and say, yep, we're going to make it 3 lanes. And they all jump up in uproar, and it was like, that hasn't been decided. And the point is, when you go to these meetings, I feel a lot of times the city's already made up its mind what it's going to do, and then they just hold meeting after meeting until all the opposition dies away because they can't take any more meetings. And the reason I bring this to your attention, because a lot of times when a bunch of people, roughly if you have 500 people that come into this chamber, the city will cave faster than a sugarholic in a candy factory. I mean, they will roll over and give them what they want. My example is, we passed a 5-year, $120 million bike plan because the bicyclists came down here and mobbed it. They didn't have any way to pay for it. They just wanted this added in, and they had a plan, and they mobbed it. And so this brings me to my recommendation. I really feel that if 500 people put down their dinner and came down here to do something, instead of letting our assembly decide, that maybe we should consider putting it on the ballot, because if that many people are that concerned about it, maybe we should take it out of the hands of these people right here that many times already have their mind made up regardless of what we all say. Because public testimony won't do you any good if the guys sitting over there are unwilling to hear it. And I've lost faith in them. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Reisley. Questions? Bob?
More of a comment. I always felt crappy when I came to testify and nobody said a word. They always implied, well, I said it, nobody listened. I like what you had to say. I think you have a unique idea of if we get a certain level of participation, maybe it begs the issue that it should go on a ballot. And I think that's a value. I've never even thought of that.
If it takes 500 people for our assembly to cave and do what they want, then if we have 500 people here, why don't we let the general public make the decision, because it's supposed to be our government to begin with. And if you don't trust them to do the right thing, then, half the time I'm wrong in the elections anyway. But at least I have the satisfaction of knowing that I'm wrong and not that somebody else made a wrong decision for me.
And again, through the chair, I appreciate the fact I attend my community council meetings, but thank you so very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to testify? Yes, please come forward. Welcome.
Howdy, howdy. My name is Richard Evans. I've been here a few times. Had to change gears kind of radically. I didn't expect to see all of you here. I expected to see the assembly and certain individuals that I was looking forward to talking to again. I say that facetiously. I won't mention names on that one, but there's somebody I hope is watching. But I'll just say that first off, to start with, is I just got this. And I had no idea that, boy, this thing's got some serious feedback on it. This is your Task Force Assembly Public Process documentation. Had no idea that there was actually a committee working on this. I thought the Assembly was working on this. So I kind of had to shift gears like a truck going downhill with a full load of logs and no brakes. I was prepared to really have it out with some people. And I got you, which actually is a lot better quality people as far as I'm concerned. So I'll start off with saying... Mr.
Evans, it's going to go to the Assembly, so you've still got your opportunity.
The Assembly members that I'm speaking of know my name very well. Okay. And they don't like me already. It's mutual. The ones that actually I've talked with that have agreed with some of the points I've made where I've spoken with, they're very much aware of who they are, and they know I don't speak about them. But I will say, thank you very much for all of you. I don't recognize most of you, unfortunately. I do recognize Carolyn. And you're a very articulate speaker over there. So thank you very much for getting involved with this. And anybody who doesn't recognize Mr. Giuliski should be set adrift in the inlet. So yeah, it's just that anybody who doesn't recognize you really doesn't pay attention. So thank you for showing up. And they said it was your birthday? Well, 2 days ago. Well, belated birthday. Nice to have you with us. Anyway, unfortunately, as I said, I kind of had to change gears here. I was expecting to speak to the Assembly, so I kind of had to go backwards on this. I took a hint from one of the people that was earlier to go just through the list. And this actually is a pretty good document. I really like it. I'd like to make a few comments on it. And as noted, it makes it a little bit easier just to follow it down the list. I didn't expect to do that. I figured I only had 3 minutes. I better just cram it in there. So we'll get to that point in a minute. First off, on the very first section, page 1, process should be open, accessible, predictable, inclusive, transparent. I would really appreciate it, this one, if you just kind of hammer this one home to the Assembly, because this, very important. I think Mr. Traney is already going to make that one clear. Being open and transparent, wow. He's already on board with that one. So that one really needs to be clear to the Assembly. I'm going to cite 2 specific examples. The first one is Title 21. It took a decade for this city to work that over. And then our duly, I believe he was elected. I believe he was elected. Mr. Mayor, yes, he decided to send it over to his personal consultant, Mr. Coffey, and have a substantial rewrite done of it all by himself. And then they got turned over to planning and zoning, and I understand there's quite a few of our mayor's appointees on that, and they just kind of and passed it on. I don't find that to be inclusive, transparent, clear in any way. So that's just one example of how the policy in Anchorage is not being settled clearly. Another one, if I need to bring it up, AO 37. And let me make this clear. I'm not a union representative. I'm not here for them. I don't need to defend them. I didn't like the way the situation was handled. I don't care who's up there. I don't care if it's Idi Amin up front and he's discussing his population control measures. Okay, this is not something you just do privately for what you want. And it's my understanding that AO 37 was in process since July, and I hadn't heard a word about it. Nobody heard a word about it. There were Assembly members I spoke with afterward who had not heard anything about it, but it was given to a private lawyer just under the cap on having to report this kind of thing, where it's, I believe it was $30,000. You have to report the expenditures if it's over that cap. It was my understanding it came in at $29,500. Mr. Traney, do you have that? He does. $29,500. Wow, what a coincidence. $500 under the spending limit, and we don't have to report it. Darn. And there was a lot of people in the dark about that when all of a sudden, boom, and it blew up. Oh, and coincidentally, again, you got to love that word. Coincidentally, that type of action was filed, if I'm correct, on a Friday, 15 minutes before close of business for the weekend, and coincidentally, what was it, 15 minutes before the close of, Mr. Moe, I believe that was 15 minutes right before you could file for an Assembly candidate? Wow, what a coincidence. And we're talking, okay, let's try this again. Open, accessible, predictable, inclusive, and transparent. That's about as transparent as a lead box. And that was not at all cool. So that got dropped on everybody, and there were many members of the Assembly who had no idea it was coming. That's not transparent or inclusive in any way. This point needs to be reiterated over and over again. So that's one on there. Controversial issues with the community in public forums prior to Assembly introduction. That's the next point. It's desirable, yes, but that doesn't seem to happen. I mean, I'm not an ignorant person, and I don't get out a lot. I'm actually taking time out of some serious deconstruction to come down here. That's why I missed your first guys' meeting. Sorry about that. But I want to make sure I was here for the second one. I actually interrupted quite a serious project to be down here. But I don't hear about these controversial issues coming up prior to the Assembly introduction. It just doesn't seem to happen. So you might want to work with the Assembly on that one, get that point across. They need to come up with something. Hey, if it's going to be something controversial, this goes back to the introduction of AO 37. That was pretty doggone controversial, and there was no warning. So we'll go on to let's go to page 2. And task force recommends that once a public hearing is started, it's right in the middle of page 2, all people who come to testify should be afforded an opportunity to testify. Well, fortunately, I got an opportunity to testify on AO 37. And once again, I wasn't there for the unions. I was there for myself. I didn't like the way the situation was being handled. I got a chance to testify. But I was here the night when a lot of people were standing waiting in line, and Mr. Hall cut off testimony. That was wrong. Period. Once that public hearing is started, you got people waiting in line, you hear them. You're an elected official. It's your job to listen to the people. You don't like the job? Move over. I'll take your seat. And I don't care who it is. I don't care what it is. And I don't care, in addressing this gentleman's point earlier, I don't care if it's a filibuster. You listen to the people. There may be something, and this is something else to hammer home to the Assembly. A lot of people don't realize this. We are not a democracy. The United States is a constitutional republic. It is based on democratic ideals. We have democratic solutions. We have democratic institutions. But we are based on the Roman Senate. A lot of people don't realize that. However, we have democratic ideals, which means that all people, and it's enshrined in our Constitution, Article 1, freedom of speech, we have the right to be heard. I don't know if any of you caught my last time I was here testifying before the Assembly. I was a little hot that night, so you may or may not have said, I recommend you check that one out. I was pretty torqued, and I had a few words to say to them about the importance of freedom of speech. My father fought in World War II, and one of the things he fought for was our Constitution. And it's very important. Freedom of speech. We need to be heard. As for another gentleman who was saying, if you pack the place with people who have little badges on or everybody's supporting place and bring in all your people, I don't care. I may not agree with their opinion, but I'm going to sit here and listen to it. And if you're an Assembly member, you really should. And instead of doing what has happened several times, I've watched the mayor do this. I don't know if he's playing Angry Birds or he's checking his calendar or what he's having for lunch. I don't know what the heck he's doing over there. He's got his little doodad sitting here, and I've looked over here, and he's not paying any attention. I mean, at the very least, can you at least feign interest? Try to get that across to him. Just try. I've had to do that in English class. I had to do that in military class. I was going to sleep. The guy up there is droning on and on. We called him Sergeant Sominex. I still listened to what he had to say. I at least tried to. At least looked like I was paying attention. That goes to your bit about Assembly presence. If you're going to show up and sit there and play Centipede on your iPhone, why are you here? Really. The last thing I want to do is take time out of my 3 jobs, come down here, spend hours listening to other people, and the only thing I get is the mayor sitting over there playing with his phone. Try to get that across to him. Assembly presence. Let's see here. If you run out of time to hear all the people come, you know what? Extend it to another meeting. This goes back to you're hired to do your job. You got more people to sign up. Really, if you're here for the job, if that's what you're here to do, you listen to the people that are here until either you or they drop over dead. Okay, then you have an excuse. So then you let's go to page, it's still same page 2, public notice, proposed Assembly action. Municipal website should be revised to be more user-friendly. Please. Okay, I tried to find out multiple facts just before I came to the meeting, and wow. Okay, I'm a computer tech, and I couldn't find my way around this website? Man, I'm spending an hour just trying to find one answer to one question, and I can't find it. Need to work on that one, please. Then let's see, items on the agenda for the S versions, so we're going to kind of skip a little bit on that one. It's page 3, basically has to do with the S versions. Where is that? I think it has, basically I wrote it down as having to do with the items on the addendum to the agenda are laid on the table for Assembly consideration, must be identified, copies of the documents must be available in the back of the Assembly chamber. Can't count how many times I've been here, no documents available. S version brought up, and we're still discussing version 1. I came prepared to testify on version 1, we're on version 3. What's going on here? I don't even have time to look at it myself, and I'm not blaming you. Okay, I'm blaming the people that are trying to throw stuff up here without giving even the public enough time to go through the documentation. I don't want to see S version 3 when I'm still working with S version 1, which I came here to testify on. If you're going to do that, continue the meeting. Send it over or say, hey, we're taking a break. We've got an hour. We're taking a break. We're going to go to a different version. We're giving everybody an hour to come up to speed. Not unreasonable. You're going to change the test questions, at least give people a chance to answer to the test. Let's go to 3, public hearings, 3B. Assembly has authority to limit the amount of time a person is allocated to testify. I have an objection to this. 3 minutes is not nearly enough time to get across a point that has a lot of information or needs to be articulated. The last time I tried to do this, which was a hearing on AO 37, I spoke like a rabid squirrel on speed. The guys over in the Marston Theater were just whooping it up. I heard about it later. They heard me talking like, oh my God, listen to this guy. As a matter of fact, the guy stepped right up behind me, had to pause his testimony. His comment was, I can't possibly talk as fast as that guy. 3 minutes isn't enough. And if you're going to give 5 minutes to anybody, make it blanket 5 minutes for everybody. I really think that needs to be increased. And we're back to, again, if it's 5 minutes and it's taking too long in the evening, I understand the assembly people, they have families, fine. Let them take a break or continue the meeting. They're paid to be an assembly person. Can we not schedule another meeting? We got 30 days in a month. City charter doesn't say, I'm sorry, we cannot schedule another meeting. Let's schedule another meeting. Make the playing field even. You got 5 minutes for everybody. And if you have an organization that comes in that wants to speak, any assembly person has the ability to say, listen, I'd like to hear something more this person has to say. I'd like to hear a little bit more information, or I'd like to ask some questions. You have that right. Any assembly, and it doesn't mean just one assembly person or who's ever in charge of the board can say it. Everybody on the assembly can say, hey, I want to hear more about this. Give everybody 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 3 minutes is not enough time. I took a speech that I took 8 hours to write, boiled it down to 2 hours, took that 2 hours, boiled it down to 1 hour, and by the time I was done, took me 2 days, got it down to 3 minutes, and like I said, I had to talk faster than I've ever spoke in my life, but fortunately I articulate very clearly, and everybody in the assembly could hear me, much to the detriment of certain individuals. So, if that one, just need more time, people, everybody. You want over? Continue it. Now, down to 3E, if a member of the public requests the use of a sign-up sheet, this management tool shall be employed. Kind of get some issues with that one. I think that one should actually be, amazingly enough, I think the assembly should be the one to make that call. Not any member of the public stepping up and saying, I think a sign-up sheet should be put up there. I like the idea that if this could be a judgment call, we got 15 people show up in the meeting, okay. We got 1,500? Yeah, I think we need a sign-up sheet. I was on the sign-up sheet. I actually liked how it worked. I was able to actually go get lunch because I knew when I was going to be on, I could go get something to eat, come back. It also works for the fire marshal. You don't have 1,500 people standing in line, wanting in the door. It also, but now I did hear your commentary about the not being able to get in the door to sign up. Okay, that is an issue. If you can't even get in the door to sign the paperwork, well, then we need to have somebody sent outside with a sign-up sheet and a little sign that says, hey, over here, sign up, something, anything. Make sure that everybody gets on it. But a sign-up sheet is actually a pretty good idea. It worked at recess. Let's go on to the next one. Let's see here. Oh, just real quick, I had one question for anybody here. Does anybody know if the assembly actually gets paid? Did they receive a paycheck for being part of the assembly?
They do.
They do. Okay, then that goes right into them. You know, they're being paid. They should listen. Okay. If the assembly, let's see, go to 4J at the top. If the assembly anticipates that public hearing will draw more people than the assembly chambers can accommodate, the Marston Theater worked great. That was a great idea. Worked great. They saw me on the screen. They thought it was cool. I had people recognize me when I walked in the door, and I got cheered. Hey, that was awesome. I like that. And people can see and hear public testimony very well in there. I like that idea. Or if this is a really contentious issue, such as AO 37, then the assembly can consider moving to a public place. This is a very good idea. I like this. We have several different places in town where this can be done. You could move it to a bigger forum. For that matter, if the weather's nice, you can have it in the parking lot.
Mr. Evans, there are other people who want to testify, so I'm going to ask you to try and summarize your comments.
Sorry about that. I will try to hurry it up then. 4D, task force recommended changes are substantial. Change the original proposal through substitution. You should have a new version, and it should be put off. And let's see what else here. I have to come, apologies, my notes were set up for being actually here for an assembly meeting. Oh, yeah, assembly presence, 9A, urge to limit the time of their dinner break to 15 minutes. I think you guys should give them a little bit more time, honestly, because if they're going to sit up here and listen to a lot of people talking, they need a little bit more than 15 minutes for a few roll aids. And let's see here. Give me one moment here. Okay, the community council issue. I don't get a lot of information from any of the community councils. If you're going to have the community councils bringing up stuff before the assembly, trying to break this down in more manageable chunks, they need to work on their dissemination of information. Because the community councils are not getting me the information. I'm getting information off the internet is where I'm getting it for the assembly meetings. I'm not getting it anywhere else. So if you want the community councils to start taking a chunk of this, you need to work on getting the assembly to say, hey, listen, this is what we're proposing. Get it out to the assemblies. Get it spread out a little bit better because it's not coming through any other way. So I got a few other issues to say, but I think that's enough for now.
We have a question from Bob Churchill.
Yeah, you indicated you were a computer tech. Have you tried to use the Federation of Community Councils website?
Federation of Community Councils website. I've never even heard of it before today.
Well, it essentially is sort of a housekeeping organization for all the individual community councils. You can sign up and get information through there that comes to the community councils. So if you just type, you would know better than I.
Yeah, Federation of Community Councils.
FCC website.
http:// Yeah, got it.
And I've told you more than I actually know at this point. So.
Yeah, that's quite all right.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Mr. Evans. We
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Would anyone else like to testify? Please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Michael Dunsmore. I was born and raised here in Anchorage. First of all, I'm going to try to follow along my little notes here on my phone, so I'm not ignoring you. That's my notes. First of all, I want to thank you all for your work on this, really. And the majority of this, I think, is really great. In fact, even just some of the categories you decided to look into, I thought were surprising, but also really important. I'm glad you looked into S versions. I'm glad you looked into the venue, and even the assembly presence section, I think, were some really interesting issues to take a look at. So I think all in all, you've done a fantastic job. That being said, I think this is a unique opportunity where the Assembly has asked the citizens to actually take a look at how they involve the public. And so possibly this is an opportunity even to do more. And in that aspect, I would point out that testifying before the Assembly and before anybody, you're commenting. You're not actually discussing with your elected officials. And so, as I do not think in any way, shape, or form anyone should be not allowed to have the public testimony. But it sucks. I have been to many, many controversial Assembly meetings over the years since I was a teenager. And it's not fun for the Assembly members to listen to hours of testimony. It's not fun for us to sit here and wait for hours, to come back 4 or 5 days. It's terrible. But everyone needs to be able to be heard. But I think if you had a more collaborative process, you might have less time spent in the Assembly meeting if you did the work outside of the Assembly meeting. So if there could be more avenues for people to actually meaningfully discuss and work through issues with their local elected officials. Maybe it can be done through the community councils if you have small group meetings and elected officials come and participate. Maybe it's a separate thing where you actually have public citizen work sessions with their, we have a couple elected officials, small group of people, you invite the neighborhood, you actually talk about the controversial things. It could be, I like the idea of having some website improvements. You could have a totally web-based service that you have forums and communication tools, and you actually talk to elected officials and have a group discussion of the people of Anchorage. It could be web-based. The idea of having, well, I think I'm getting a little sidetracked. And I know there are a lot of tools out there, and that there are some other cities around the country that are doing similar things for various projects. So I know there are things out there. Okay, let me get back to my notes and more specifics. And so the real issue is that we have this legislative body format, this Robert's Rules of Order. It just doesn't allow for discussion. And so if I want to have my opinion heard, I'm going to sit here and wait for hours and talk to you for 3 minutes. But I would have loved to have sat down for a half-hour work and discussed stuff with you in a group instead, if I could have. About the S version section, I am curious about your recommendation that the clerk's office would evaluate whether it needs to be a new ordinance and have new hearings and stuff. My thought is that if it's an S version, it's substantially substituted. It probably needs to be something new. If it's something that the members can do amendments on the floor, then probably doesn't need to be anything new. I mean, that happens all the time. The sponsor goes, oh, you know what, yeah, let's change that sentence to say blah, blah, blah instead if that makes the other members happy. That doesn't need to be new. But if you're going to present a new document, you really should, and especially for a multiple days of testimony, because if I read some version the night before, I show up to the meeting and there's a stack in the back of a new S version that I haven't read, and I came here to testify, it makes it kind of difficult for me to come from an educated perspective. So I'm not sure, and I'm not really sure the clerk's office needs to be making those sort of deliberative valuations. As great as our clerk's office is, they're not elected officials. We didn't elect them to choose and make decisions for us. The section about having a public record, please, having a public record that's accessible for anyone to read online would be amazing. If I could, and make it really obvious on the website. I mean, I should go to the Assembly webpage and there should be a big link that says, comment on ordinance number blankety blank. I click that button, I write my stuff, it sends in, and then I can go and look at the record, and there's my thing in the record. Wonderful idea. I mean, really, I couldn't. Having that accessible not just to the elected officials, but to everybody, to have it a community discussion, would be priceless. And if you wanted to find a way of having you mentioned having a login system and verifying people's identities. I would just wonder if there's possibility we could contract with the state of Alaska and tie it into they already have the My Alaska logins, which everyone does because they're PFDs, and already verifies your address and everything. I mean, maybe we could look into contracting with them for their address and verifications. As for assembly presence, in the state, when you go to Juneau, as some of you have been and worked there, we don't allow electronic devices on the floor. You can have them in committees, but not in the legislative body. So possibly should we look into not allowing cell phone uses between assembly members and force them to be more present, but also it means that all communication they have has to be open to the public. Instead of, I'm going to email the other assembly member sitting 2 seats down, like, I'm going to vote this way. How are you going to vote? You know, it has to be a public discussion in the public meeting. Is that something we need? I'm not sure, but it might be something worth thinking about. And the same thing, following those same lines, assembly members leaving the room, obviously people have to go to the bathroom, they have to refill their coffee, they have to do whatever. But the reason why, we already have a serial meeting law that we can't let more than 3 assembly members meet at a time without it being a public meeting. And that kind of is to give the appearance of being upright. So there's no appearance of impropriety. But you kind of lose that when you see 2 assembly members walk into the back room and maybe the mayor follows them and then they come back 5 minutes later. Maybe they didn't discuss anything that was happening on the floor during the public meeting, but maybe they did. And for sitting here and watching, you have no idea. So I don't know if there's some way to limit that so that it doesn't appear to the public that the important information isn't public, that it's happening back there instead of out here, which is very unsettling. I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping around as I read down my notes. About the time limit, I understand. My question, I guess, would be, what is the purpose of having a 3-minute time limit? Is the purpose of a time limit strictly to make it flow faster so that it doesn't take as long? And if that is the sole purpose, is that really a reasonable purpose? Should we be limiting our public participation? Or should it be just up to the chair to keep everything moving at a reasonable pace? I mean, and we all know the reason why we're here and working on this is because the public faith in this has been a little bit shattered over the past year and past 6 months or so. So that's why you're asked here, and that's why we're all here. So, I mean, I think these are important questions to think about. It would be really great for people to know what's coming up on the assembly agendas better, and I noticed you talked about that in the notifying of, what was that, section 3 about assembly meetings, about the public hearings. The more places we can tell people what specific ordinances are going to be talked about on that Tuesday, the more likely you're going to get people to think about it and come and that have real thoughts they want to give, instead of being like on the spur of the moment, oh my gosh, I saw on the 5 o'clock news that they're talking about this and I have to run down. Maybe the city should try to partner with our local media outlets. Maybe every Sunday paper there should be an ADN. Here's what's coming up this week at the assembly. There should be a little column. Maybe we should work with Channel 2 to run a thing. Reach out to some of our media and see if we can get those announcements in more places where people might see them. And of course, social media, Facebook, and that stuff. It'd be really great if the Muni had its own. Maybe it would probably have to be run through the clerk's office. Sorry, Amanda, but its own Facebook and Twitter and that sort of stuff.
We do.
Really? Wow, no one I know has ever used it. That's cool to hear. I'll look for it. Maybe even a Muni app. If we could have an app developed for my phone so I could follow along, would be awesome. And about the meeting room itself, your section 7. One, I like the idea, which actually wasn't in this section, but that if we need a bigger venue, we should use a bigger venue. I mean, it's silly to have people outside in the hall, wherever, where they can't really hear what's going on and follow. I mean, the city has lots of venues. But this room itself, you've noted, is not super well set up. The acoustics are bad, as I'm trying not to right now have too much feedback. But beyond that, this is a really intimidating thing to do. Not only is this room kind of off-putting with this raised bar and everything, but I'm a professional performer for my job. I'm a professional dancer. I've performed on some of the biggest stages in the world, the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg, Russia. And I get nervous when I come and talk here. I don't know why, but it's really intimidating, and I think if we could, if we could fix that and make it easier for people. My parents are both professional attorneys. They talk for livings and argue cases, and I've seen my parents break down in tears trying to testify before the assembly. This is frightening. I mean, no one likes to do it. And so if we could, I think addressing the venue, because it's so standoffish, and you got the camera and the microphone, you're way back there. I don't know. It's something that I'm glad you put in here to discuss, but even more, if anything we could do to put people at ease and make this really easy for them, which again might be taking it out of this setting, letting them work in a small group in a little discussion and actually do things. And with that same kind of train of thought, not so much the assembly, but all the commissions and our other elected and appointed bodies and elected bodies that go along that work for the assembly, everyone should be comfortable with the public being there. They're all public meetings that are public noticed, and I have shown up to more than one commission meeting, granted being the only member of the public, and had the members be really uncomfortable with me being there. Asking me why I'm there or not. Recently with the election commission, they were extremely uncomfortable having the public involved. I know some of you up there remember that. Same thing, I went to a Health and Human Services Commission meeting, and they were very uncomfortable having someone watching what they're doing. I don't know if there's some way to involve them more and get them used to the fact that the public should be involved and should be interested. And even if you're just serving on a commission, you're still serving the people. I don't know if we need to have better training or something, or just work with the public more. And okay, 2 more thoughts, almost done. And so just to answer what was coming up earlier in the evening about sign-up lists. Sign-up lists are clunky. If you have we all know that, a single sign-up list, you call 3 names, 2 of the people aren't there, it takes time, what if we did it more like airline boarding? So where you have like zone 1, 2, 3, 4, or rows 25 and above. So maybe make a list, and I'd say probably about 20 people per chunk of testifiers, because that, in theory, if everyone takes 3 minutes and go fast, that's an hour. And that way it kind of gives you a manageable amount of time. Each 20 pages sign up should be an hour of time. And you say, okay, page 1, lineup, you're zoned in. And then when you finish page, you go page 1 and 2. So in case you missed your page 1, you're still included. You didn't lose your opportunity. And then zone 1, 2, and 3, please line up. And at the same time, the clerk staff would be easy. They just have a list of 20 people, and they could easily calculate and tell you about how long they think you'll be. 1, 2, 3, 4 hours. I think it would be possibly a little less clunky than a just straight sign-up sheet, which I remember from the Summer of Hate with AO64 was not very fun. All that being said, I would wonder if when you submit this, if there is some way to really emphasize that although you did all this work, which is fantastic, and you really analyze this, at no point are you actually suggesting changing our charter. Are you actually suggesting we make new laws? You're merely suggesting procedure. And I think it's really important that we emphasize that you guys are, by reading our charter, our Section 10 you have highlighted nicely for us here, of our Bill of Rights, which is fantastic, and I know two of you helped write it, and thank you very much. I appreciate it. All you were doing was reading that and coming to the conclusion that the process should be open, accessible, predictable, inclusive, and transparent, and that the task force recommends that once the public hearing is started, all people who come to testify should be afforded an opportunity to testify. This isn't making a new law. It should be clear that whatever might have happened in the past, if they didn't do this, that was wrong. They weren't following the charter. This isn't you guys aren't making new law to say, aha, it'll be fixed in the future. We're just reading the charter and saying, this is how it is, and if you didn't do this, you messed up. And I wonder if there's some way to emphasize that right when you hand this to them, to be like, this is not a new interpretation. This is our recommendation in our reading, but this is what the charter says. And if you didn't do it, you might have consequences. All right, I'll be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnsport. Bob Churchill has comments, and I'm sure several others do.
Michael, you have the document in front of you, correct?
Yeah.
The very last item on the first page, you talked about more collaborative, open, participative processes. Does that capture your thinking? Starts the discussion of controversial issues?
It doesn't quite. Yes, I mean, that thought is good. I guess it doesn't recommend how they should do it, and I think some of that would be as well. And I know you're a representative of the community council, and I've been to several community council meetings, and they are, I'd say, less intimidating to the assembly, but not unintimidating. They still have to follow that same Robert Rules legislative procedure. The members sit up front, you raise hands, you vote, you make motions. It's still not a group sit down and discuss a problem sort of scenario.
Thank you. I get where you're coming. I've been in a number of processes, and you're taking a step back from that, much more of a task force problem-solving style of group rather than a group that has a body and voting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't limit who's invited. I mean, maybe the community council could organize it, but you invite everyone in your district and say, please show up if you want to talk about this issue. And I don't know the trick is I don't know how we decide what's controversial enough to warrant that and what's not. But it seems like you would save, instead of having 600 people line up, if 400 of those people already met in small groups 2 weeks prior, they wouldn't necessarily have to line up, and then we wouldn't all be here till midnight.
Thank you.
There's several people who want to come in. I want to say two factual things first. One is when an S version turns into something else that it should become a new ordinance, we don't say who does that because we couldn't figure out how. And I want to let you know that the city and borough of Juneau has an ordinance that says that when an ordinance actually morphs into a totally new idea, they have to start over again. And when we talked with assembly members and the clerk in Juneau, we said, how do you do that? How do you know when it has happened? And how do you implement it? And actually, there was a goodwill answer having to do with looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and we figure it out. And I'm being flippant, but I'm saying that who has the authority to do that are the very people who are making the law. And no external force, a clerk or anyone else, can actually say, I'm blowing the whistle, you've just passed the line, and we've turned into a new idea. And so we really, really discussed that at length. So we said, think up how at what point you observe it. But even telling them that observe, there's a time when what you started with is so different than where you ended up that it's a new idea. That we proffered that as a consideration for them. Secondly, we completely discussed in many ways the collaborative structure that you've suggested and are open to any suggestions of how to describe how that might look and how it might feel and how there might be time allocated for that in a complex structure, but we completely agree with you about that. So with that, I'm going to...
Can I make one quick comment on that?
Yes.
It's not my expertise. I'm not sure how to do it. I will say, though, I had the opportunity just this past week to attend very briefly just the closing dinner of a public participation conference, international conference that was just held in Salt Lake City, and of public participation, public involvement experts. Those people know. I mean, there are consultants that are their jobs to do these sort of projects for, whether it's just for transportation or whether it's for a whole city or a whole state. So I might not know those answers, but there are resources out there and examples to look at. And if it involves the city looking into talking to some public participation experts, I would think that would be a great idea. But
Terrific. I also want to mention one other piece about the S version, and that is that in some respects, the S version becomes a way to come up with better language than people amending, and then you end up with a document that, and so I'm just saying that there are choices on either side in terms of how that works. So in balancing our right to know what's going on, we might be making it less desirable, and so we've got to balance that out. And that was also discussed. With that, I'm supposed to stop me talking and let Carolyn talk and others.
Thank you, and thanks, Michael. I wanted to kind of address the 3-minute time limit because I heard about it from you and others, and we discussed that at length. And the reason, like I said before, community councils were brought in is because they are actually part of the charter. But when I was in school, if I was told and I was given 100 pages worth of data and told to write a 1-page report, if I turned in a 1.1-page report, it got flunked. You were told to turn in a 1-page report, you turned in a 1-page report. And that means if you need to take 100 pages of data and bring it down to 1 page, you do it. And I understand that that's complicated. So within the system, we have one more piece, and that is you can provide written testimony. So our idea behind the 3 minutes is that that's what's been used. We do need to move a process along. And so please come up in that 3 minutes and give us your highlighted data points. And then from there, whatever else is left over, please provide it within written testimony. And you can provide you can provide 100 pages of written testimony. There's no limit to that. So to kind of keep that in mind, and we are looking at ways of trying to put that written testimony online so it can become, in essence, a dialogue amongst people.
I think it's really important for people to know that it's getting on an official record and that it's going to be publicly accessible. And so in 10 years, if another body of different members wants to take up the same issue and they go back to do their research, it'll be there for them to find. I know specifically I've asked the municipal clerk in the past, if I use the email address that sends to all the assembly members, does that go on the official record? And I was told not necessarily. It sometimes makes it in the packet and sometimes not. I guess it should be very explicit on the website and everywhere and in the instructions, hung up in wherever you can put it. You can give official written testimony. Here's how you do it. It should just be 100% explicit.
And we agree with that, and that's one of the main points.
Other questions, comments? Thank you so much for your thoughtful testimony. Who else would like to testify? Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. I'm Pat Redmond, and I want to thank you for the work you've done. I think when I came in tonight, I was going to say, this is great, and it is. And I was also going to say that Kathy Gleason pretty much covered a lot of the things that I was going to cover. But then Mr. Ferguson got up, and then my blood pressure went up. And I disagree completely with his comments. Part of what he said was that community councils can do this. Well, community councils do this. They do try to provide a place for the public to come and get basic information on these issues before they come before the assembly, if they know about them. But the community councils, It seems to me that before we formed the Federation, when we were forming the Federation, our budget was $120,000 a year. That was for a number of years when we actually had fewer community councils and a much smaller community. The current budget is $80,000 a year. Now, this is going to come up later. There's another, we're looking at the community council ordinance and all. But just be aware that if community councils are going to play a significant part, which they should be doing, they need funding. $80,000 a year in the community we have today doesn't do it. So that's my part there. The other part, I thought your affirming principles were very good. I really like that. Regarding time limits, it seems like at some time, it might be before the Planning and Zoning Commission, there's some place where I've testified where it was 3 minutes for individuals and 5 minutes for organizations, representatives of organizations, but I don't remember when or where that was, but it was within the municipality. And organizations would be things like Brother Francis, Alaska Center for the Environment, and I'm not saying those, but I know that those organizations are ones that where I've been testifying had gotten longer periods of time to testify. So there must have been something somewhere that was written that defined that. Catholic Social Services, Lutheran Social Services, groups like that, which are nonprofits. As a matter of fact, pretty much all of these were nonprofits. So that might be something to look at, but I'm not sure if you want to define it that much. It might be that we have the 3-minute limit, and then someone says, as an organization tonight, you can have 5 minutes. It depends on the issues, maybe. Sign-up sheet. If a member of the public requests the use of a sign-up sheet, this management tool may be employed. I don't like the word shall. I know this is a draft document, so I'm sure that some of these will be looked at again, but I don't like the word shall. I think may, and I'm not sure if the member of the public should be the one requesting the sign-up sheet. Hearings may be set for Saturdays. Hearings could even be held on Saturdays, but I won't say maybe. The next thing you know, we'll have all our meetings on Saturdays, and it's going to be the Saturday of July 5th, the day after the 4th. So don't do that. I was really pleased with the work you've trying to do on the substitutes, because that's a big problem. The notices on the website and public information. I went today, just before I came, I wanted to make sure that I had this correct. I even checked the RS feed, because RSS, whatever that's called, to see if there was anything new on there. And the public notices for assembly coming up for the 8th, there were 1, 2, 3, I don't know, there's 12 or so public items for public hearing. They all just have the ordinance number. I have to actually go in and look at that item to find out what it is. I have the ordinance number and all, but it didn't tell me in the RS feed. I would have to actually go look at the agenda or go somewhere else to find that. And I don't think that's adequate. And I have to remember to go to the RS feed. And
that was our very first recommendation under public notices, is that the title of the ordinance should accompany the number.
Right, and I wanted to re-emphasize that. The other is information getting out to the public. I get a notice from the planning department on all the ones on planning issues that are coming up, whether they're public hearings, requests, whatever. Because I've checked specific community council areas that I want, and so actually, basically, I get it for the whole municipality. But I get it, I look at it, it tells me, almost every one of those, what community councils have been notified, specifically for those. Other community issues that may not, but land use issues have to go to community council, at least be notified. Now, whether or not we discuss them depends on the issue. It may be something really that we don't really need to even discuss. But some of those do come before us, and we talk about them. Other things, I found out that there's going to be some community sales tax discussions. And I found it because I did not go to the chamber meeting, but the day after the meeting, I pulled the mayor's PowerPoint from the chamber discussion about the state of the city. And in that, towards the back, is a page that said, sales tax community discussions, and it gives dates. I went to the website of the municipality twice now. I have not been able to find any other information on these meetings. Now, it does say where they're going to be, but I can't find any background on it. What material are we going to have? And actually, these should go to community councils, too. It shouldn't just be, so there's 4 dates, and they're coming up at the end of October and the first part of November. I don't even know which department to look in to find out the information. So that's something, you know, I know you're addressing it, but there's a good example of where there's a problem. There was one other little thing that was really important, but I don't remember what it was at this point. It had to do with that, again, letting people know about meetings and information. But I think everything, basically, you've done pretty good about putting this all together, and I really appreciate the time you put in on it.
Thank you, Pat. Joelle, would you like to talk about?
I would like to talk about sign-up sheets. I'm like a one-tune horn up here. I'm sorry. I just want to clarify for the record the rationale behind the citizens can ask for a sign-up sheet suggestion that we have there. During AO 37, we contacted the chair of the assembly prior to the first public hearing, suggested a venue change because we knew we would have thousands of people, over 1,000 people here. That was denied. We asked for the WILDA, it was already booked, and we asked if there was going to be a sign-up sheet, and he said there wouldn't be a sign-up sheet. There's no mechanism by which the citizens can request a sign-up sheet, and when you know that your issue, whether your issue is AO 37 or AO 64 or fluoride or cat licensing, if you're going to turn out over 200 people, they're not going to fit into this room. The notion of being able to have a organized system to manage those people, it's really important. So left with a vacuum of nobody being willing to organize the people, it's left to the group. It's left to the citizen group to fulfill this role. There was a lot of testimony in the first night we did this that they were uncomfortable with the notion that it's a citizen group fulfilling this role, and I can totally understand why. You're walking into a group of people, you don't know if they're going to put your name on the list. One time we heard testimony in AO 64 that somebody was told that because they were 11 years old they couldn't testify. That's completely wrong. But that's because somebody who was not the municipal clerk was staffing the sign-up sheet. I really feel it's important that if a group of people asks for a sign-up sheet because they know they're turning out, we need a responsive assembly. We can't just let this, I don't want to imply motive. I'm taking Andre's point to heart here, but there's room for misinformation and disorganization and confusion and frustration and tempers, and there's all of these things that can happen as a result of, and that was just one meeting. No, so you see where we're coming from, right? There has to be a way that the citizens can demand that some order be applied if the assembly is unwilling to do it, which is what we encountered. An unwilling assembly and a group of people who know they're going to have 1,000 people turning out.
So you want to say it shall be employed. If
it's asked for,
it might
shall
be
employed.
You may have to have it's something you're going to have to work. You're going to have to work on that. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I just
think that shall is such a, we had that discussion when you guys were writing the charter. I remember being on committees to do that. The shall was a really hard word to do. Which brings me to something else I forgot. When Mr. Ferguson said that this becomes a public political process, the public process is a political process. So let's just make it a little easier, and it is uncomfortable testifying.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Thank you for your comments. Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Nick Moe. Some people might recognize me as the write-in candidate in this last April. And I ran because of this issue, why we're here, because of the shutdown of testimony. So it's something I'm very passionate about, and which is the reason why I'm very thankful that you guys are taking this on and working on this. And I'm very happy with the recommendations you came up with. I think that really did a good job of reflecting the public comments you received at the last meeting. I think the bottom line here is that yes, everyone does have a right to speak to the assembly, and I'm happy that you emphasize that here. And I think just echoing what others said, that other meetings can be scheduled, other venues can be utilized, and I work weekends when I have a workload, and the assembly's paid to listen to us, and they should follow through with that. One thing I wanted to emphasize with these recommendations is that they're very good, but what insurance do we have the assembly will adopt these? And so my hope is that those who are serving on this commission can help, and task force can really work equally as hard to make sure that some of these get adopted, because I think some of that work will be even more important. And I encourage the people here in this room to definitely get involved in that process as it moves forward with the assembly. I'd also like to thank the assembly members who are here in attendance. I think that speaks to the importance of the assembly needing to address this. My only addition, I have a few additions that I'd recommend to this document. One is, in terms of the meeting space, when people walk into this building, it's a little confusing. You have a theater on one side, two theaters, you have, you don't really know what's going on, and you have agendas that run out, and, not to throw Amanda under the bus or anything, but you don't have any eyes out there. And my recommendation is to put a little more community in this process, and you could get high school interns who are in charge of every meeting to hand out agendas, orient people to what the topics are and what's going to happen, and let at least people know where to go. I was standing out there before this meeting, and I was kind of serving that role as people were coming in kind of confused, and I thought it'd be great to do that. Also, just in regards to the committee structures and the need to try to front load the public process on ordinances, I wholeheartedly agree, and just to echo what I think Mr. Dunsmore said is, the community councils could be an excellent place to do that. We have community councils for a reason, and I think that in order for them to accomplish that, we need to give the community councils more resources to do their job and to do the proper outreach, and to make sure that process is followed through. I think it'd be great to have representatives from the 39 councils here every meeting to represent their neighborhood's perspectives, and that might accomplish some of the issues that we've been having with a lot of people testifying. And just to comment on the 3 minutes, I do think that 3 minutes is adequate, but only if assembly members read the written testimony that's given to them. And I've been told by assembly members that, it's just not possible to read every email, answer every phone call, or respond to every person. And that might be an issue right there. If that is accurate and some assembly members don't have that capacity, then possibly additional legislative staffing or using some other system to ensure that assembly members are getting those written comments, so that all input is heard. And the in-person testimony is the most important we can have. That's why I think that we need to make sure that's continued. So with that, that's all I have to say. Thank you again for your work. I sent an email just today about the piece of technology that might be good. So you received that, Amanda. that might be utilized. And also the reader board, like what is that? What the heck's going on right there? There's some pieces of technology that could be upgraded to that could make the meeting a little more clear. So
Thank you, Mr. Moe. Are there any questions, comments? I appreciate your comments. And if you have any ideas about how we get a really good reader board, we are ready for a reader board that tells everybody what's going on. So, would anyone else like to testify? Would anyone? Welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Joanne Inglis, and in full disclosure, I work for the municipality of Anchorage in the planning department. I'm also the vice president of the Anchorage Municipal Employees Association, and I was tasked with AO37 as crowd control, or line control. For the record, I did not tell the 11-year-old that she couldn't testify. I would have never told an 11-year-old that she can't testify. I would have encouraged her.
It was another issue.
Okay. I do like I appreciate all the work that the Commission is doing on this. I think that AO37 really brought out some problems with our public process. In my duties as the line control person, I found one, like Ms. Hall said, that we did ask for a different venue, we asked for a sign-up list, and we were told no. So then we ended up with the cluster that started out the first night. I started a sign-up sheet, but I found that to be cumbersome doing it from the back room for me because, of course, I don't have a microphone, I have no control, and I'm really not in charge of the crowd. It just so happened that the crowd let me be in charge at the time. So the second night, a friend of mine decided to use the number system, and that's where you saw that we handed out, for example, number 1, we would give 10 people number 1, and that's when you saw us putting the numbers up there so everybody knew, because at that point we had people over at the World of Marston and in this assembly chambers, plus out in the lobby. So I do like the fact that the Assembly is following, I like the principles that this is, not the Assembly, the task force, that this is an open, accessible, and predictable process, and that the controversial issues are sent out to the public in advance. I appreciate that because, as you know, AO37 was thrown out, 5 minutes on a Friday and introduced on a Tuesday after that. I appreciate, number 2, the public notice of proposed assembly actions. I'm not sure, and I didn't check this before I came down. I'm in the planning department, so yes, our planning notices go out. I'm not sure if the clerk's office is signed up for that also, where they can also send them out with the community council information. I like the email notice idea also, even though a lot of people, I can't say that everybody in the city has an email or has a computer, but a vast majority do. The laid on the table items, I've been at assembly meetings, and it is very frustrating that the laid on the table items are laid on the table and then you don't know what's going on. Just like the S2 version was thrown on the internet the last minute. It was all confusing because they kept changing the document. People were turned away when they changed the document, and I think that people should be allowed to continue to testify if they've changed the document, because there might be something significant in there. Like I said, the sign-up sheet is cumbersome for me, but it would probably work if you had somebody in charge. It might slow down the meeting. But I agree with some type of system that will allow people to know when they might be up on the list, maybe even put it up so they know, because part of the problem was the guard in the back wanted to keep those aisles open, so you had to turn people away. People got frustrated and mad. I like the idea that they have to continue until people are done talking. I mean, we're still small enough in this town that the public should be able to come out. How often is the assembly chambers really packed? And it's not very often. So we're still small enough that we don't need to employ some of the ideas that Juneau has, because in the back room with the mayor, he's like, well, Juneau cuts off public testimony, and, well, we're not Juneau, is what I kept telling him. So that's basically a lot of what I had to say. I made some quick notes, but I thought I should come down since I was crowd control at the AO 37 meeting, and I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I do agree with the dinner break thing. It is very frustrating to show up here at, I don't know, sometimes 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and they go on a dinner break for some reason. And then everybody's thinking, I didn't have dinner, what's going on? So I was really annoyed. I get really annoyed when people come up here because, like the previous speakers said, it is very intimidating to come up here and speak. I don't even like doing it. And then you see them get up and they walk out of the room, or they're playing on their cell phones. And I don't know, they should probably employ some rules that they shouldn't be openly playing on their cell phones and jumping up and down during the meeting. Maybe the chair should take some more breaks, small 5-minute breaks, so that people don't feel disenfranchised. That's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Churchill has a question.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. That whole thing about the age had to do with 64.
Okay.
It had nothing to do with you. Your name was not used. The idea, though, of the list, what we really talked a lot about was the idea of a sign-up sheet was with the effort to provide predictability and inclusion, not exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And we really did, all of us brainstormed. I was in a forum where we were able to generate a list, and you knew. You could go to the list and say, they're on 137, I can go use the restroom, or I can go have lunch, or they won't get to me today, I'll need to come back tomorrow. So it was sort of in that vein we really wanted to. The other thing, you guys that did the list on 37 got lots of neat compliments about how well that was run, so I just wanted to...
Yeah, I think, putting it up on a screen somewhere.
Well, it was from other people too.
I think putting it up on a screen somewhere, that way people go, oh, it's... but like I said, we were running the show when we weren't supposed to be. The assembly should have been.
There's another question from Carolyn Ramsey.
I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to say thank you because I was there for 37, and I liked your number system, and we batted it around here. I think I kind of got vetoed and back to the sign-up list, but I really did like the way that worked, and it was just nice to go, oh, okay, well, I'm in group 10, but I can wait until the back of the line in group 10.
Yes.
So, anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Potter?
Joanne, I know you're no stranger to the process, but in your comments about this being an intimidating space and some of the other speakers tonight that talked about it being intimidating here, what could be done with the physical space to make it not so intimidating?
Well, I think anytime you put a body up above everybody else, they start thinking, wow, what's going on? And so maybe putting them somehow closer. I don't really know how to fix it, but...
Because there has been some discussion in the past about reconstructing this portion of the room, and it always seems to be a budgetary issue that they don't get around to it. But, since the day this opened, I thought this was an architect's get even with Tim deal, because giving a lot of presentations in this room from there, it's a very, very difficult room to communicate. And when you do communicate with the assembly, you're typically cutting out the public because they can't see what you're doing. So it's just not a friendly room for a presentation. So I appreciate your comments. Thanks.
Definitely. I was going to say something, but I can't remember what it was.
A comment from Jim Barnett.
The person who designed this is a fellow named Dave Walsh, who some of us already remember served on the assembly a little before my time. And I remember after it was designed and installed that a lot of us suggested instead that we get rid of this and just have a big kitchen table and the 11 around the table and then the one person who wants to address us at the front of the table. And, were there a will and a way, I think we should go back to the kitchen table.
We're still small enough. I think so.
Thank you.
Well, and also I do want to note that during AO 37, they were in such a rush to pass it that they actually canceled one of the public hearings for, I can't remember if it was the planning board or not. So actually citizens that were trying to push forward development plans or development were held off because of this. This room is used for most of the public hearings, I mean all the public hearings for planning and the assembly. I'm not sure what else.
Other questions, comments?
Just to clarify that this room is used officially for the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Plating Board, the Urban Design Commission, and the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals for official venues. Then the Building Board and a variety of others also use this at their available times. But the Assembly can always boot any of the other lesser boards or commissions. So.
I think when I introduced Mr. Potter, I did say he spends a lot of time in this room.
He does.
The issues that are present in what we've heard tonight, oh Lord, I'm tired. The issues that we've heard tonight really kind of run through everybody that uses this facility. So it seems to be designed for purposes other than for which it's used. So, we perhaps ought to consider that as a recommendation about how people seem to universally find it didn't accommodate the public.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
Another thing, I don't know, and I didn't get all the way through, and I may have missed it. If there's a request for a venue change, because you're going to have a big turnout, you may want to consider a venue change and allow that if necessary to accommodate the crowd.
That was one of the recommendations in here.
Okay.
If you know you're going to have a lot of people, move it to some other public facility, of which we have many.
Yes. Thank you.
Is there any people who would like to testify? Anybody else? Did we lose the students? The students were, all right. Well, we were happy that there were high school students here and that the teachers suggested they come to find out what government in action is all about.
So this on the last one to testify?
You are the last person to testify.
Okay, thank you.
To my knowledge, we think, I don't know. When I said, was anybody else like to testify, you're the only person who walked up.
Okay. My name is Eugene Haberman. You spell my name H like Harry, A-B-E-R-M-A-N. Tonight, Tuesday, October 1st, 2013, I am addressing you in the response to a public invitation as stated in a press release dated yesterday, Monday, September 30, 2013, quote, to seek continued input from the community on the Assembly's public hearing process, end of quote. The first press release for this public hearing was released on Friday, September 20, 2013. It was stated in this press release that, quote, the task force has compiled a list of recommendations for the Assembly's consideration, which is attached to this press release, end of quote. Unfortunately, when reviewing this press release on the website of the municipality of Anchorage, I found no such attachment with this press release. Further search by me on the same website came across such a document, but failed to have any reference to being an attachment to your press release dated September 20th, 2013. It was further noticed by me that such a document failed to indicate that this had been approved, signed off, and dated by you. This was not surprising to me due to my appearance at the last two public meetings held by you. Both meetings were principally called for the purpose of drafting and approving draft recommendations to be made available for the public to testify on at tonight's public hearing. The first meeting was held on Wednesday, September 18, 2013, representing a committee of interested members of your task force to draft these recommendations. The second meeting was held the next day on Thursday, September 19, 2013, when you met to review these recommendations and approve a draft of recommendations for the public to comment on at the hearing tonight. At this meeting, you had provided comments as to what changes or deletions you had wished to have in this draft document. Since that meeting and prior to the release of the press release of September 20th, 2013, there was no public meeting in which your task force had approved, signed off on a final draft document to be made available for public comment at the public hearing tonight. In both press releases dated September 20, 2013 and September 30, 2013, you falsely claim that you approve these, quote, recommendations, end of quote, that are provided here tonight for public comment. Furthermore, the public notice for the meeting held by your subcommittee of your task force for drafting these recommendations on September 18, 2013, started at 2:30 p.m., was not made available until that same day on the website for the municipality of Anchorage. This situation resulted in that meeting being in violation of the open meetings law for the state of Alaska. Towards the beginning of that meeting, I addressed you and stated this. In response, you had no comment and proceeded with conducting the meeting. The appropriate action at that meeting following my statement should have been by you to immediately adjourn the meeting after issuing a statement that any action taken at this meeting prior to this is voided. I should also point out that same day, I received an email at 10:45 a.m. Alaska time from the Office of Municipal Clerk for the Municipality of Anchorage inviting me to attend the meeting that was to start less than 4 hours later. A public meeting held is not to exclude people from having an opportunity to attend a meeting. This invitation and lack of notice of this meeting to the public had illegally allowed for an exclusive group to know and attend this meeting. I wish to also point out that one member attending this meeting and a member of this task force was Amanda Moser, Deputy Municipal Clerk for the Municipality of Anchorage, a member of this task force who joined with you in complete silence to my charges that day. I wish to also call attention to your press release dated September 20, 2013, in which you stated that it is, quote, a list of recommendations for the Assembly's consideration, end of quote. My question to you tonight is, how can you have a list of recommendations for the Assembly's consideration when you have not even held a public hearing for public comment on your draft recommendations? Prior to the establishment of your task force by Anchorage officials with the Municipality of Anchorage, I have released to Anchorage Municipal Assembly, Mayor Dan Sullivan, and members of the public, including members of Alaska Press, a series of reports with regards to my continued investigation in the public process used by Anchorage officials when conducting meetings, including boards and commission meetings. This ongoing work came about as a result of my early decision on April 4th, 2012, to investigate the process used by officials associated with the Municipality of Anchorage when viewing the election held in Anchorage on Tuesday, April 3rd, 2012. An election in which more than 40% of the polling precincts ran out of ballots for voters to vote in that election. Among the concerns addressed in these reports include my concern to the failure of Anchorage public officials, including members of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly, when conducting meetings to be in violation of the Alaska's Open Meetings Law, AS 44.62.310 and AS 29.20.020A, and the Anchorage Charter, Section 17.05. When reviewing the public process Anchorage officials have used and continue to use when conducting meetings, I continue to find Anchorage officials conducting meetings that are in violation of the laws noted above. On Tuesday, May 22nd, 23rd, I had submitted detailed testimony to the Anchorage Municipal Assembly during a hearing amending Anchorage Municipal Code 2.30 regarding the taking of public testimony at public hearings. During my testimony on this ordinance, I stated that, quote, when conducting meetings with regards to the proposed ordinance noted above, my findings indicate that you have violated all the laws noted above, end of quote. During the Assembly meeting of Tuesday, June 4th, the Anchorage Municipal Assembly passed a resolution AR 2013-46 that would provide for the establishment of a citizen task force to advise and assist the Assembly in its development of procedures governing the Assembly's conduct of public hearings open to testimony from members of the public. Unfortunately, with the passing of this resolution, the Anchorage Municipal Assembly had failed to follow the appropriate legal steps in establishing a task force. Such a task force should have been established after introducing an ordinance for a public hearing and establishing such a task force. No such hearing had occurred. Furthermore, the resolution fails to identify the persons involved in the appointment process of members of this task force. In my closing statement to you tonight, I wish to quote to you from my closing statement that I addressed to you at your public hearing of September 3rd, 2013. Tonight, quote, tonight your appointment by Anchorage officials to this task force has provided a false hope that public concerns over public testimony at public meetings would be corrected. Today, we have a situation in which the fox is guarding the henhouse. The only appropriate way for this to be corrected by you is for you to submit your resignation tonight, along with all members of the Anchorage Assembly and Mayor Dan Sullivan. End of quote. Thank you. Any questions?
Would anyone else like to testify? Hearing and seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your testimony.
For running it.
Yes, Mr. Potter.
I just wanted to clarify, on the agenda, is there a persons to be heard for any other
I apologize.
items?
I
just wanted to make sure we
apologize.
completed the
Thank
agenda.
you. Thank you. Thank you. It's not closed on the agenda. It does say there's now audience participation for anyone to come and talk to us about any topic they would like to talk to us about. Would anyone like to come and participate under audience participation?
My name is Eugene Haberman, and I have a question to go on the record concerning, it's my understanding that as a group you met prior to this meeting to have a so-called dinner break.
Correct?
Well, there's a serious question by you having such a meeting without any public notice that this could be a factor to violating the open meetings law. Thank you.
Thank you. We brought sandwiches and a salad, and we had that in the back room before the meeting started. That is correct.
I would like to describe some situation to show you what I mean, okay?
No.
Okay, I can't explain a situation that I've watched, not you with your group, but someone who's, some government body that I witnessed is following the open meetings law incredibly well. Can I give that an example?
Sure.
The case is the City Council in Palmer, Alaska. I have not testified before them, but I have followed their meetings because I had interest to see and correspond to how meetings are being held in Anchorage versus how meetings are held in the Valley, particularly Palmer and Wasilla. In attending those meetings, I was pleased to see they understand what the open meetings law. The integrity of that body is incredible. In fact, I witnessed 2 meetings in a row. At the time of public comments by the council members, at one meeting, they had no idea who I was. At one meeting, one person says, if we do this and considering being involved in this meeting, are we attending a public function? Are we going to be violating the open meetings law? That same situation occurred the following meeting at a regularly scheduled council meeting. And a different council member brought up the issue. That body is really following, and they understand the open meetings law, and they have very good people there. And this is not rocket science to how to conduct a meeting. And there's one phrase here that I noticed on this thing, on this task force that's dealing with public hearing process. The words is not right because it avoids the key thing, how to hold a public meeting, not a public hearing, a public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to talk to us about anything else? There's a motion to adjourn. Is there objection? Without objection, we are adjourned. We will meet on Thursday at lunchtime in order to meet with the Assembly Rules Committee and provide our recommendations to them. Mr. Barnett.
Are we going to be entertaining amendments to our recommended document at that time to respond to what we heard tonight?
Yes. However, the question is, do you want to do that before we meet with the Rules Committee and to talk among the task force, or send emails to propose, or how do we want to do it?
I could send an email. I have a couple of suggestions.
What's the desire of the body? Do you want, today is Monday, we're supposed to meet on Today is Tuesday. See, this is really helpful. This is really helpful. Okay.
But Thursday we're meeting with the
Rules Committee.
The Rules Committee, but we're not submitting our final report until next Tuesday night.
No, we are giving the Rules Committee our report, and we're discussing it with them. We're actually having a discussion with the Rules Committee about the report, and we can change. We have the opportunity to amend this recommendation tonight. Before we meet with the Rules Committee, we can change our recommendations so that what we present to the Rules Committee is reflective of the public hearing this evening, or we could do that with them when we meet with them.
That's fine.
Yes.
I think that it would be very useful if members could make us all are, I judge you, but I doubt that they're going to be a good number of
Okay, so how about if we have emails from people so that we have, and what I'm saying is, if you have suggestions of changes predicated on the public hearing tonight, that you send those emails to everybody and that we comment back and forth. Hi.
maybe staff. Well, I mean, is that your...
Well, I mean...
To disperse the comments.
No, the question, procedurally, it's, do we send everything to Amanda, Amanda sends it out, or do we send it to each other? Which eliminates an extra step. And we have each other's emails if there are recommendations.
Would it be possible to send it to each other, and then if we have a vested interest in making changes? I agree with Arla. I think it's going to be relatively minor or enhance what we've already decided. If you want to participate in that, maybe we meet a little before when we're already scheduled to meet on Thursday. Show up at 11:30, and we can talk about that, because I'm totally comfortable with what we decide as a group.
Okay, so the suggestion is that email recommendations go back and forth, and that we have a list of what those proposed changes are, and we discuss those at 11:30 on Thursday, and that we then have a fluid conversation with the Rules Committee when we meet with them. Any other discussion about how we're going to proceed? Mr. Trainee, welcome.
Madam Chair, just one quick thing. On the 8th of October, we're going to have an event here. When you're here, we're going to have this whole room packed. We have a couple of competing issues on when the ballot is going to come forward in 37. So what you've been talking about now, we haven't had a crowd here. I just want to let you know on the 8th, this room will be packed.
So, my question...
Probably.
Actually, my question is, are you therefore suggesting we report to the Assembly on another day?
No, you and I can talk about it tomorrow, Jane. I'll give you a call tomorrow, because we are going to have a capacity room on the 8th because of dealing with this issue on when 37 goes to the voters. I anticipate this room would be packed. So let's talk tomorrow and figure out what works best for you guys.
Okay. We closed the public hearing, but I noticed that there's another member of the public who just showed up, and I'm going to offer him the opportunity to participate under audience participation. Is there anything you want to say to us about I know you had a prior commitment.
I wasn't planning on it. I thought the Assembly was going to be here. My name's Kelly Walters, W-A-L-T-E-R-S. Thank you all for taking the opportunity to hear me again and to figure out what to do about the public comment process that, in my estimation, isn't broken. And I think to further my comments last time about this, you only need read the newspaper to see that the problem is not with the public or the public comment process, it's with a few elected individuals that don't like to be public servants. And they don't want to have an election despite a court ruling that the mayor now has appealed to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court, I understand today, came out and said that they would expedite a ruling in January. And I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, if they came out before that and just said, we're not even going to listen to this. We're going to send it back, and the ruling stands if they could do that. But again, that's the problem, and I think the proof is in this last go-around with this appeals process. And that's really all I've got to say on it, except to thank you for your time, and I hope you guys can report back to the Assembly prior to the packed house on the 8th.
Thank you very much. We're scheduled on the 8th, and are we on the agenda as a separate item before the ordinance? Go ahead.
The Citizens Task Force, Amanda, through the chair, the Citizens Task Force is on the agenda under special orders, and it is my understanding that there will be a motion to change the order of the day so that we can appear around 6 o'clock.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will see each other on Thursday,
Either at
11:30.
12.
I'll notice the meeting for 11:30.
Thank you very much.